Working the night shift was never something I dreamed of, but the pay was decent, and I needed to cover my bills. It's one of those roadside gas stations in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and darkness. The only light around came from the flickering convenience store sign, which kept blinking like it was ready to give out. The night started off quiet, as usual. Only a few cars stopped by, most of them just to refuel and leave without even coming inside. Around 2 a.m., a guy walked in. Tall, wearing a gray hoodie with the hood up and worn-out jeans. He looked nervous, glancing around like he was searching for someone or something. He only grabbed a bottle of water and paid with a crumpled bill. He barely said a word other than a dry, "Good evening." But the way he avoided eye contact made me uneasy. After he left, I went back to my phone, trying to shake off the weird vibe he left behind. But not even 20 minutes later, he came back. This time, though, he was wearing different clothes, a black shirt and a leather jacket. At first, I thought it was someone else, but his face was unmistakable. He walked slowly through the store, grabbed a pack of gum near the register, and this time, he looked me straight in the eye. That's when I saw it. His jacket was open, and something shiny was tucked at his waist. A gun. My heart started pounding, but I pretended not to notice. As he placed the gum on the counter, my hands began to sweat. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my face heating up, and I avoided looking at the thing on his waist. He didn't seem in a hurry, which only made everything feel more unsettling. He grabbed the gum, pulled some money out of his pocket, and silently placed a $5 bill on the counter. I thanked him, my voice trembling slightly, and handed him his change, not even sure if he would take it. But he did. He took the change, gave a small smile, almost as if he was amused by my nervousness, and walked out slowly. I froze for a few seconds after he left. I looked at the clock. 2:25 a.m. There was a phone behind the counter, and for a moment I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? A guy bought gum and might have a gun? It didn't make any sense. He hadn't done anything wrong, at least not yet. But the fact that he came back wearing different clothes and acted so strangely put me on edge. I kept staring out into the darkness, waiting to see car lights or any sign he was still around. There was nothing. Just silence, heavier than ever. I tried to distract myself by organizing the shelves near the counter, but I couldn't get his image out of my head. The open jacket, the glimpse of the gun. Why did he come back? Why change clothes? None of it made sense, and that only made it worse. Every time the automatic door made that annoying beep as it opened, I jumped. But it was always the wind or some bug flying near the sensor. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard something that wasn't the wind. Footsteps. Quick, coming from outside. I ran back behind the counter and checked the security cameras, trying to see what was going on. No one was in the frame, just the gas pumps and the empty road in the background. My heart was pounding so hard, I almost fell over when the door suddenly opened. It was him again. This time, no jacket, just the black shirt from before. He was sweaty, and his expression seemed different, heavier, like something had happened outside. This time, he didn't wander through the aisles. He walked straight up to the counter, shoved his hands into his pockets, and stared at me. I didn't know what to do. He just stood there, staring at me like he was waiting for me to say something. My mouth was dry, and any attempt to speak would have come out as a stutter. After what felt like forever, he let out a low laugh, almost as if he was trying to mess with me. "Busy night, huh?" he said, his hands still in his pockets. It was the first time he said more than a word, but the tone was unsettling, cold, like he was testing me. I nodded, trying not to show how nervous I was, and muttered something like, "Yeah, you could say that." He laughed again, but this time took a step back, pulling one of his hands out of his pocket. My stomach dropped. But instead of drawing the gun I was sure he had, he just pulled out an already open pack of gum and popped a piece into his mouth. He chewed it slowly, staring at me like he had all the time in the world. Then, without warning, he turned around and walked out. I stood frozen, but this time I went to the door to see where he was going. He didn't get into a car, wasn't in the parking lot. He disappeared into the darkness, as if he was never there. I stood by the door, waiting to hear the sound of a car starting or some movement that would prove he was still around. But there was nothing. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights in the store. I went back to the counter and tried to make sense of everything. He had something planned, I was sure of it, but for some reason, he didn't follow through. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment. Maybe he was testing me. The image of the gun at his waist wouldn't leave my mind, and that small smile he gave before leaving felt like he was mocking my fear. Around 3:30 a.m., I decided to check the security cameras again. I rewatched the moments he entered and left. The first time, in the gray hoodie. The second, in the leather jacket with the gun clearly visible. And the third, just in the black shirt. Something strange caught my attention. On his third visit, he didn't appear coming from the parking lot, at least not on camera. He just seemed to appear out of nowhere, already near the store just outside the frame. My stomach churned. I started to wonder if he was still out there, hiding somewhere. After re-watching the footage, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. Every noise outside made my heart race, and every shadow seemed alive. I tried to convince myself he was gone, that he was just some lunatic trying to scare me. But nothing could shake the uneasiness. I couldn't stay still. I got up, went to the door, and locked it for the first time that night. The sound of the lock clicking gave me a false sense of security. But what if he was still out there? That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging, like someone walking right outside the store, close to the wall. I ran to the cameras again, but saw nothing. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling the police. But how could I explain what was happening? A strange guy showed up 3 times, and now might or might not be lurking outside. As I tried to decide, the footsteps stopped. The silence returned, and with it, a chill ran down my spine. I waited, frozen, staring at the locked door, but he never came back. When the sun finally rose, the only thing left was the fear that he might return someday. I worked as a cleaner at a Montessori school for a few years, and I never thought such a peaceful place could leave me so shaken. My shifts were always at night, after the students had gone home, and the halls were quiet. It was just a normal routine, nothing special. But that night, something felt off. As soon as I walked in, I felt this strange uneasiness, like the air was heavier than usual. I thought it was just exhaustion. I went about my work, cleaning one classroom at a time, listening to the sound of water in the mop bucket and the squeaking of the mop on the wooden floor. Everything was normal until, around 9 p.m., a phone started ringing. The sound came from a room at the end of the hall. At first, I was confused because I knew everyone had left, and that room had been locked since earlier in the day. I walked over, convincing myself that someone must have forgotten their phone. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a cell phone. It was the classroom's landline ringing. I don't remember ever hearing that phone ring before, maybe because it was never used. I picked it up hesitantly and said a nervous, "Hello." On the other end, a woman's voice quickly responded, thanking me for answering. She introduced herself as a teacher named Emily and said she was locked in one of the rooms. My heart raced. I had never heard of a teacher named Emily at that school. I asked the voice for more details, trying to stay calm, but my hands were already sweaty. She said she was trapped in the art room on the 2nd floor and needed help getting out. My first instinct was to believe her. After all, who would lie about something like that? But as I climbed the stairs, something started to bother me. I knew all the teachers at the school, even if only by sight, and there was no one named Emily. Still, I decided to check it out. When I got to the 2nd floor hallway, the silence was so complete that even my breathing sounded too loud. I opened the art room door slowly, expecting to find someone inside, but it was completely empty. Everything was in its place, no one there. I pulled out my phone to call the principal, thinking he might know what was going on. But before I could dial, the landline started ringing again. This time, the sound came from another room, 2 doors down. I froze for a few seconds, feeling a chill run down my spine. The only thing that made me walk to the other room was the thought that, if this was some sort of prank, I needed to put an end to it quickly. When I entered the room, the phone had already stopped ringing. It was dark inside, but something in the air felt strange. A faint smell of burnt chalk mixed with mildew. Before I could leave, I heard a soft sound, like faint footsteps, coming from the hallway I had just walked through. That feeling of being watched started to consume me. I walked back to the hallway, trying to convince myself the footsteps were just my imagination. When I got to the doorway, I looked both ways and saw nothing. The place was as empty as it should be. But then, the phone started ringing again, this time coming from the music room at the end of the hall. I don't know what gave me the courage to go there, but my curiosity mixed with a sense of duty, like I needed to figure out what was happening. I opened the door slowly, and there it was, the landline phone on the teacher's desk, ringing insistently. I picked it up again, and the same voice spoke, but this time it sounded different, more hurried, almost desperate. "You need to help me," she said, as though on the verge of panic. I asked her where exactly she was, and her answer sent chills through me. "I'm in the music room. With you." My hand froze on the phone, and my eyes scanned the entire room. There was no one there. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. Before I could say anything, the call disconnected. That's when I noticed something at the back of the room. The instruments were all covered, as they should be, but the grand piano had its lid open, and one key was pressed down, emitting a continuous, muffled sound. I knew no one had touched it. I had been alone the whole time. I just wanted to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and ran toward the staff room, thinking I could call someone for help and leave the school as fast as possible. As I descended the stairs, I heard another noise behind me. Something hit the floor with a loud crash, like a chair being knocked over. I instinctively turned around and saw one of the second-floor doors swaying slightly, as if someone had just passed through it. The air felt heavy, and I had that kind of chill that you can't explain, like the atmosphere itself was pushing me to leave. When I got to the staff room, I went straight to the locker where I kept my belongings. As soon as I opened it, the landline in that room started ringing too. I knew I shouldn't answer it, but I couldn't help myself. Curiosity and fear mixed together, and before I realized it, I was holding the receiver to my ear. "Why did you leave?" the voice asked, softer this time, almost a whisper. It was the same woman, but something about her tone was different, colder, more unsettling. "I need you. Don't leave me alone here." Before I could respond, something metallic clattered on her end of the line, sharp and abrupt. I hung up immediately and threw the receiver back onto the cradle, trying to convince myself none of this was real. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my bag tightly and rushed to the main door, but when I reached it, something made me stop. The door, which should have been unlocked, wouldn't budge. I tried turning the handle with all my strength, but it wouldn't move, as if it were stuck. I looked back and felt a wave of dread wash over me. All the lights in the hallway had started flickering, one by one, until the entire place was plunged into darkness. My body felt frozen, but my senses were heightened to the point where every breath I took seemed deafening. The silence was broken by a soft, unsettling sound. Murmurs, faint but unmistakable, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. They seemed to be closing in. With no other options, I bolted into the nearest room and locked the door behind me. I chose the library, a place that usually brought me some sense of peace, but now felt as threatening as the rest of the school. I leaned against the door, trying to steady my breathing. The room was dark, except for a dim emergency light in the corner. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the chairs at the back of the library was turned toward me, as if someone had just been sitting there. Worse, there were wet footprints on the carpet near the chair, leading toward where I stood. I knew they weren't mine. As I stared at the footprints, I heard a faint noise from the hallway. It was a whisper. No, several whispers, all overlapping and impossible to understand. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. When I opened them, the footprints on the carpet had changed. They had been facing away from me before, but now they seemed to lead toward me. I took a step back, unable to tear my eyes away until I stumbled into one of the library tables. The sound echoed through the room, and the whispers in the hallway stopped instantly, replaced by a crushing silence. Then I heard something worse. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming down the hallway toward the library. I panicked and turned the key in the door, locking it as quickly as I could. I stepped back, nearly tripping again, as the footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could hear faint breathing, shallow and uneven, on the other side. Was it a person? Something else? I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, but the next sound almost made me scream. A knock, sharp and heavy, against the door. Then another, and another. Each knock was louder than the last, making the door rattle as though it was about to give way. My entire body was frozen in fear, but my mind was screaming for me to do something. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands, almost dropping it, but there was no signal, as if something was blocking the connection. That's when I noticed something even more terrifying. The breathing on the other side of the door had stopped. The knocking also ceased, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. The feeling that someone or something was still there, waiting, was unbearable. Then, in the dark, I heard the voice again, but this time it wasn't coming from the phone. "You shouldn't be here." The words came from a corner of the library, barely illuminated by the emergency light. I turned toward the sound and, for a brief moment, I swear I saw a figure moving between the shelves. My instinct was to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the faint sound of the shelves swaying slightly, as if something had brushed past them. I tried telling myself I was imagining things, but the smell of mildew mixed with something metallic, like blood, was real. I knew I had to get out before it was too late. I summoned every ounce of courage I had left and ran to the nearest window, thinking I might be able to escape that way. But when I got there, I found the windows locked with chains I'd never seen before. I looked around frantically, searching for another way out, but the library felt more oppressive with every passing second, like the room itself was closing in on me. Then I heard it again, a faint, dragging sound coming from behind me. I turned slowly and saw something that still haunts me to this day. A shadowy figure, elongated and formless, crawling across the floor and up the walls as though it were alive. There was no light source to cast that shadow. It was just there, moving toward me. Without thinking, I bolted for the library door, no longer caring what might be on the other side. I turned the key so hard I thought it might break, but the door finally opened. When I stepped out, the hallway was pitch black, except for a single point of light near the main exit. I ran toward the light, feeling like something was just inches behind me. Each step echoed in the silence, but somehow it didn't sound right. It was as if there were more footsteps than just mine. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, focused on reaching that light before it was too late. When I finally reached the light, I realized it was coming from a flashlight lying on the floor near the main door. I picked it up with shaking hands and pointed it at the door, hoping to find an escape. But the handle was covered in something black and oily, like soot or grease. I turned it with all my strength, but it still wouldn't budge. That's when I heard it again. The footsteps. Slow, steady, coming from behind me. The flashlight flickered, reflecting in the glass of the door, but I couldn't see anything immediately. I turned around slowly, aiming the light down the hallway, and froze. Standing in the middle of the hall was the shadow I had seen in the library, but now it looked more solid, almost human. It was tall and thin, but its edges shimmered and moved erratically, like smoke caught in the wind. Even without eyes, I could feel it staring at me. A coldness deeper than anything I'd ever felt washed over me. The flashlight began to flicker again, and the shadow took a step toward me. That's when I panicked. I started screaming, banging on the door, begging for it to open, as I felt the presence closing in. Then the flashlight went out completely, and everything went silent. The silence felt like it lasted forever, but it was only a few seconds before something even stranger happened. A low humming sound began to fill the air, coming from every direction. It was like a chorus of voices, distorted and impossible to decipher. I turned back to the door, pounding on it with all my strength, desperate to get out. Then I felt it, a cold, soft touch on my shoulder. It wasn't violent, but it was enough to freeze me in place. I didn't dare look back. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, clutching the door handle like it was my last hope. And then, suddenly, it all stopped. The humming, the footsteps, the oppressive feeling of being watched. Everything vanished. When I finally gathered the courage to look behind me, the hallway was empty. The flashlight, which had fallen next to me, flickered back on, its beam revealing nothing but the silent, still corridor. Then, I heard a soft click from the door behind me, as if it had been unlocked. I scrambled to my feet, turned the handle, and ran outside without looking back. I didn't stop running until I was in the parking lot, gasping for air. I don't know what happened in that school that night, and I still can't explain it. I've never told anyone in person, only here, because I feel like I need to share it. All I know is I never went back, and I hope I never hear that voice again. I've never been one to believe in those strange stories you read online, but after what happened that night, I'm not so sure anymore. It was a Friday, around 11 p.m., and I was alone in the office, trying to finish a report that was due by the weekend. I used to enjoy working late at night with the quiet and no one around to distract me. But that night felt different. I can't explain it, but the whole building seemed restless, like I shouldn't be there. I tried to ignore the feeling because, honestly, I'm a practical person and don't get caught up in these things. As I was typing, I heard a strange sound coming from the hallway. It was faint, like muffled voices, almost a whisper. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. It was late, I was tired, and maybe it was just the plumbing or the wind outside. But then I heard it again, and this time it was clear. Someone was talking. I stood up, more curious than scared, and followed the sound. It was coming from the conference room at the end of the hall, the one we always locked up after hours. The weird thing is, I was sure I was the last one to leave earlier and had already checked the doors before settling in to work. When I got closer to the conference room, the voices stopped. I stood there for a few seconds, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing, just silence. The door was shut, as usual, but something felt off. There was a faint light coming from under the door, a glow that didn't make sense since I'd turned off all the lights before starting my work. My curiosity got the better of me, so I crouched down to peek through the crack at the bottom of the door. I couldn't see much, just vague shadows, like someone might be inside, but the light seemed to pulse faintly. My heart started racing, and for a moment, I thought about going back to my desk and pretending none of this was happening. But then I heard a sharp sound, like a chair scraping against the floor, and I froze. I don't know what gave me the courage to do it, but I decided to peek through the gap between the door and the frame. It was a small space, just big enough to catch a glimpse of the inside. What I saw made me step back immediately. There were people, or at least they looked like people, sitting at the conference table. They weren't talking or moving. They were just sitting there, staring directly at the door. Even with the dim light, I could tell their faces were wrong, like they were covered in a shadow that shouldn't be there. They didn't blink, didn't breathe, but I could feel they knew I was watching. My whole body went cold, like my blood had stopped flowing, and I felt an almost primal urge to run. I slowly backed away, trying not to make any noise, but it felt like every step echoed through the entire hallway. Every second that passed, I was convinced they were watching me, even though they couldn't see me directly. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the building's security, but of course there was no signal. That had never happened before. I stood there for a few moments, torn between running for the exit or going back to my desk and pretending this wasn't real. But something inside me, maybe pure curiosity or sheer stupidity, made me stay. I needed to know what was going on, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave. I walked back to the door, but didn't look directly this time. I just stood there, trying to hear anything. That's when I realized the silence wasn't normal. It was absolute, suffocating, like the entire building had gone still. Not even the hum of the fluorescent lights, which was always present, could be heard. Then, out of nowhere, a faint scratching sound started, like someone was dragging their nails across the surface of the table inside. The sound was uneven, almost maddening, but at the same time, deliberate. It was impossible to ignore. My heart was pounding, and my legs started to shake. I wanted to believe it was some kind of prank, maybe the security guards trying to mess with me, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The scratching got louder, more frantic, as if multiple hands were clawing at the table at once. My head began to ache, the noise piercing straight into my bones. And then, everything stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved across the gap at the bottom of the door. It was large, much larger than any person could be. My entire body froze. Before I could process what I was seeing, the doorknob started to turn, slowly and deliberately, as if whoever was inside wanted me to know they were there. The doorknob stopped moving, but the door didn't open. Instead, I heard a loud click, like the lock had been secured from the inside. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I didn't dare try the door, but the idea of standing there any longer was unbearable. That's when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The hallway around me seemed darker, as if the light was being drained from the space. The darkness spread through the hallway, slow but steady. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting shifting shadows on the walls that made everything feel claustrophobic. My instinct was to run, but I was paralyzed, afraid that any movement might draw attention to me, even though I had no idea what was out there. I started to back away, keeping my eyes on the door, but the further I retreated, the heavier the air around me felt. My chest ached, as if something was pressing down on it, making it hard to breathe. And then I heard it again. The sharp scrape of a chair, followed by a single, deliberate step, like someone inside was standing up. That sound broke my trance. I turned and sprinted back to my desk, grabbing my things in a panic. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to unlock my drawer to grab my keys. That's when I noticed something even more terrifying. The desk lamp I had been using was now off. It had been on the entire time. The only light left came from the hallway, and even that seemed ready to go out. I didn't bother shutting down my computer or packing my bag. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the elevator, but, of course, it wasn't working. I was trapped on that floor with whatever was following me. With no other choice, I headed for the stairwell. Every step I took felt like it echoed unnaturally loud, and worse, I could hear another sound. Between each of my steps was a lighter, fainter one, like something was following me. I tried to go faster, but my legs felt like they were moving through molasses. When I finally reached the ground floor, I shoved the door open and stumbled into the main lobby. It was completely dark, except for the faint green glow of the security cameras. Desperate, I ran to the panel to see if I could figure out what was happening. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Every camera feed showed the conference room. The light inside was gone, but the figures were still there, motionless. Then I saw something on the hallway camera that made my stomach drop. There was a shadow, standing perfectly still in the middle of the corridor, facing the stairs. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. I dropped the monitor and bolted for the front door, convinced I'd lose my mind if I stayed there another second. When I reached the glass doors that led outside, I froze again. They were locked. They were never supposed to be locked from the inside. My hands shook as I yanked at the handle, trying to get it open, but it wouldn't budge. Then I saw my reflection in the glass. Behind me, at the end of the hallway, the shadow was there, closer than before. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just kept pulling at the door, begging it to open, until I heard a faint click. The handle turned on its own, and the door creaked open. I didn't stop to think. I ran straight to the parking lot, not even daring to glance back. When I finally did, the building looked completely normal, dark and quiet, just like it should have been all along. No sounds, no shadows. I never went back there again. I quit my job the following week and haven't worked alone at night since. To this day, I have no idea what happened in that conference room, but one thing is certain, those weren't people. I work as a cybersecurity analyst, and my night shifts are usually uneventful, just me and the blinking screens. That night, everything seemed normal until around 2 a.m, when I heard a sharp knock at the back door of the office. It was an odd time for any kind of delivery, and honestly, we rarely use that entrance. I immediately checked the security cameras, feeling a bit uneasy, and saw someone standing there in a generic delivery uniform holding a package. He knocked again, more insistent this time, and said something I couldn't quite make out through the faulty intercom audio. I grabbed the intercom headset and asked what he wanted. He responded politely, saying he had a package for me. That was strange because I wasn't expecting anything, and honestly, no one ever sends deliveries to the office at that hour. When I asked who the package was for, he hesitated before saying my name, but the way he said it felt forced, like he was reading it or making it up. That's when I got that weird chill down my spine. I told him I wasn't going to open the door, and that if it was important, he could return during regular business hours. The guy stood there for a few seconds, staring directly at the camera, before turning and disappearing from my view. After he vanished from the camera, I tried to get back to work, but the strange feeling lingered. To be honest, my office building is pretty isolated. There's just an empty parking lot out back and some trees that make the place feel creepier at night. I checked the cameras again, just to be sure, and there he was, standing in the parking lot. He wasn't leaving or fiddling with his phone like a normal delivery person would. He was just staring directly at the building. His stance was rigid, motionless, as if he were waiting for something or someone. That made me uneasy, but I figured maybe he was just trying to scare me. 20 minutes later, he was still there, completely still. I decided to call the building's security, but, as usual, no one answered. That happens a lot, and I usually shrug it off. But that night felt different, more urgent. To make myself feel safer, I double-checked all the door locks and even pushed a desk against the back entrance. When I looked back at the cameras, I noticed he had moved. Now he was closer, almost under the parking lot light, but his face was still just out of the camera's view. It was like he knew exactly where not to be seen clearly. My concern turned into real fear when I noticed he wasn't holding the package anymore. It was just gone. I kept thinking about whether he had left it somewhere or if this was all just an elaborate act for something worse. Meanwhile, he stood perfectly still, except for his head, which occasionally tilted slightly toward the cameras, as if checking whether I was still watching. By now, my heart was racing. The feeling of being watched so deliberately, so calculatedly, was suffocating. I decided to call the police, but to my surprise and bad luck, the phone line was dead. At first, I thought it was just a technical glitch, but I tested my personal cell phone, and it didn't work either. Internet? Fine. Every other system? Functional. It was just the damn phone line that was out. At this point, everything felt like a psychological game, and I was the target. I checked the cameras again, and he was gone from the parking lot. My stomach dropped. I sprinted to recheck the locks and realized something I had completely forgotten. The small window in the side hallway. It never locked properly. I rushed to the side hallway and crouched near the window. The glass was closed but not locked, just as I had feared. I tried to turn the latch, but it felt stuck, like something was blocking it from the outside. My heart nearly stopped when I heard a faint scraping noise coming from outside. The window was small, high enough that no one could get in without a ladder, but the idea of someone trying to reach me from that angle sent a shiver down my spine. I decided not to turn on any lights in the hallway to avoid drawing more attention. I went back to the control room, trying to think rationally, but the situation had already spiraled out of control. When I checked the cameras, he was back. Only this time, he wasn't in the parking lot. He was at the front door, facing away from the camera. The way he stood there, completely still, as if he knew exactly where the camera would catch him, made my stomach churn. Then he started to move, slowly, until he turned his face just enough for me to see that he was smiling. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was almost a challenge, like he was daring me to do something. I stayed glued to the camera screens, unable to look away. He didn't do anything except stand there, smiling that unnerving smile. It wasn't human. It looked forced, like a grotesque imitation of emotion. Suddenly, he started knocking on the front door. At first, it was slow, almost like he was testing something. Then the knocks got louder, more forceful, like he wanted me to know he wasn't leaving. The sound echoed through the empty office, making my heart pound harder. I couldn't figure out what was happening or what he wanted. I tried using emergency apps on the computer, but nothing would load. Everything seemed to work except anything that could connect me to the outside world. It was like I was being deliberately isolated. When I looked back at the cameras, he was staring directly at one of them, even though it was hidden in the ceiling. He shouldn't have known where they were positioned, but it felt like he could see through them. The sense that he was in control of everything was maddening. The air in the office felt different, heavy. Every noise seemed amplified, like even the smallest movement would give me away. I decided to turn off all the lights to try to hide better, but as I adjusted the cameras to night vision, something even more bizarre happened. He was just gone. I scanned every angle, every corner, and nothing. He wasn't at the door, the parking lot, or near the trees. It was like he had evaporated. For a moment, I thought it was finally over, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then I heard a muffled sound from the ceiling. Something was moving up there, slow, uneven footsteps. I tried convincing myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon, but the weight of those steps was unmistakable. It wasn't small. Whatever it was seemed to move directly above me, as if it knew where I was. The fear froze me in my chair, but my mind screamed at me to run. I grabbed my phone, still no signal, and hid under the desk, keeping the camera feed in view. Any movement there might give me a chance to act first. I didn't move. Every muscle in my body felt locked, like something was holding me down. The silence was deafening, and even my breathing felt muffled. The air had turned icy, but it wasn't a normal cold. It felt like it was coming from inside me, draining all my energy. I finally worked up the courage to turn my head, slowly. But the room was empty, or so it seemed. The feeling of being watched was suffocating, like someone was standing just out of view, inches away. Suddenly, I heard something scratching the floor behind me, followed by a faint whisper I couldn't make out. That was enough to make me run. I don't know where I found the strength, but I bolted out of the control room toward the emergency exit. I didn't look back, not even once. When I finally got outside, the fresh air hit me like a punch. I looked around, but the parking lot was empty. There was no sign of him, or anything else. It was like the terror had been trapped inside the building, as if it had never existed at all.
Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The company sent me to Indianapolis in early October for a 3-day training seminar on their new inventory system. I'm an assistant manager at a sporting goods store in Ohio, and corporate decided all of us needed hands-on experience with the software before the holiday rush. They booked us at the Travelers Inn off Interstate 70, one of those budget chains where the carpets are permanently stained and the ice machine sounds like a diesel engine. I didn't mind much. After 12-hour shifts on my feet, anywhere with a bed and hot water would do. Plus, I was getting paid overtime just to sit in a conference room and click through PowerPoint slides. The hotel sat between a truck stop and a 24-hour diner, surrounded by warehouses and distribution centers. Not exactly scenic, but I wasn't there for sightseeing. That Tuesday night, I got back to my room around 9:30 after grabbing dinner with some co-workers at the diner next door. Room 118, ground floor facing the parking lot. I remember because I could see my rental car, a white Nissan Altima, parked right outside my window. The room smelled like old cigarettes despite being non-smoking, and the air conditioner rattled like marbles in a tin can. But I was exhausted from 8 hours of software tutorials. I took a shower, called my husband Brian to tell him about my day, then settled in to watch some mindless reality TV. Around 11, I turned everything off and crashed hard. Tomorrow was the last day of training. Then I could drive home and sleep in my own bed again. The parking lot had been pretty full when I closed the curtains. Mostly pickup trucks and older sedans, probably belonging to construction crews and warehouse workers staying long-term. I woke up to voices, angry ones. At first, I thought it was the TV from the room next door. Maybe someone watching an action movie with the volume cranked up. The clock on the nightstand showed 2:47 a.m. in those harsh red numbers. But then the voices got louder, more distinct, and they were coming from outside, not through the walls. Multiple people, men from the sound of it, and they were seriously pissed about something. I could hear car doors slamming, engines revving, that aggressive back and forth that happens when people are about to throw punches. My room was right by the parking lot, remember? So everything was crystal clear through that thin window. I sat up in bed, debating whether to peek through the curtains or just mind my own business. Hotels like this, you learn not to get involved in other people's drama. Then came this sound I'll never forget. Like firecrackers, but deeper, sharper. 3 quick pops, then 2 more. My brain tried to process it as anything else. A car backfiring, someone dropping something heavy, those industrial dumpster lids slamming shut. But deep in my gut, I knew exactly what I was hearing. Gunshots. Real ones, not movie ones. The yelling turned to screaming. Car tires screeched and then more shots. Rapid fire this time, like someone just holding down the trigger. I rolled out of bed and hit the floor, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The carpet was rough against my cheek, smelling like decades of spilled coffee and cleaning chemicals. I could see the bottom of the door from where I was lying, that thin strip of yellow light from the walkway outside. That's when the first bullet hit my door. The wood splintered with this horrible cracking sound, and I actually saw the hole appear, jagged and dark, about 3 feet up from the floor. Then another one punched through the window, and glass exploded everywhere. The curtains jerked like someone had yanked them, and cold October air rushed in. I pressed myself flatter against the floor, trying to become part of it, trying to disappear into that nasty carpet. More shots outside, so many I lost count, and the sounds were different now. Some hollow pops, some thunderous booms like different guns all going off at once. A bullet hit the wall above the bed and I heard it tear through the drywall, sending white dust drifting down like snow. My phone was on the nightstand, might as well have been on the moon. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but lie there with my arms over my head. The chaos outside was insane, men shouting orders or threats, I couldn't tell which. Someone was crying, these awful gurgling sounds that made my chest tight. Engines roared to life, tires squealed, and I heard metal crunching like cars were ramming into each other. Another bullet came through the window, and I actually felt it pass over me, this weird zip of displaced air that made every hair on my body stand up. The mirror on the wall shattered, raining down in pieces. I could hear people in other rooms now, someone screaming. Doors slamming, feet pounding on the walkway above me as people on the second floor ran for the stairs. But I stayed frozen on that floor, counting my heartbeats, trying to make myself smaller, wondering if Brian would even know what happened to me if I died in this crappy hotel room in Indianapolis. Everything went quiet so suddenly it was almost worse than the shooting. My ears were ringing, this high-pitched whine that made everything else sound muffled and distant. I stayed on the floor, barely breathing, waiting for it to start again. Outside, a car alarm was going off. That repetitive honking that usually annoys the hell out of you, but right then it was proof that the world still existed. I could smell gunpowder, sharp and acidic, mixing with the cold air coming through the broken window. My legs were starting to cramp from being tensed so tight, and I realized I was grinding my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Slowly, carefully, I lifted my head just enough to look around. The room was destroyed, holes in the walls, glass everywhere, the curtains hanging in shreds. The TV had a bullet hole right through the screen, and there was stuffing from the mattress floating in the air like cotton balls. Then I heard sirens, distant at first but getting louder fast. Police, ambulances, the whole cavalry from the sound of it. Red and blue lights started flashing through what was left of my window, painting everything in these crazy, shifting colors. I finally found the courage to crawl toward the nightstand. Glass crunching under my palms and knees, tiny cuts stinging, but I didn't care. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, even though help was obviously already coming. The operator's voice was so calm, asking if I was injured, telling me to stay low, stay away from windows and doors. I wanted to laugh. My window was gone. My door had holes in it. Where exactly was I supposed to hide? I gave her my room number, told her I was alone, unhurt, but trapped. She stayed on the line, that steady voice keeping me grounded while chaos erupted outside again. Not gunfire this time, but police shouting commands, radios crackling, boots running. For what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, I huddled in the corner between the bed and the wall, still on the phone with the 911 operator. She kept asking me questions. Was I bleeding? Could I see anyone outside? Did I hear anyone trying to enter my room? Through the destroyed window I could see cops everywhere, their flashlights sweeping across the parking lot like search beams. There were bodies out there. I could see feet, legs, someone's arms sprawled at an angle that wasn't right. The white rental car next to mine had its windshield spiderwebbed with bullet holes, and there was dark liquid pooling underneath it that I didn't want to think about. An officer finally came to my door, announcing himself loudly before asking if I was okay, if I could open the door. My legs were jelly when I stood up, and I had to lean against the wall to make it to the door. When I opened it, the cop looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night, sweat on his forehead despite the cold, eyes darting everywhere at once. They moved me to the hotel lobby while they processed the scene, gave me one of those metallic emergency blankets that made me look like a baked potato. The lobby was packed with other guests, everyone in pajamas and underwear, some crying, some just staring at nothing. An older woman from room 122 had her arm in a sling. A bullet had grazed her shoulder while she was sleeping. A family with 3 kids huddled together on one couch. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5, clutching a stuffed dinosaur and asking his mom why the fireworks were so loud. The hotel manager, this skinny kid who couldn't have been older than 25, kept apologizing to everyone like he'd personally started the shootout. Paramedics were checking people over, cops were taking statements, and through the glass doors I could see the parking lot transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape everywhere, numbered markers next to shell casings, photographers documenting everything. A detective interviewed me around 5 a.m., a black woman with gray streaks in her hair who introduced herself as Detective Washington. She was thorough but kind, walking me through every second of what I'd heard and seen. Did I recognize any voices? Had I noticed anything unusual earlier in the evening? Could I identify what types of guns from the sounds? I told her everything I could remember, but it all felt jumbled, like trying to describe a nightmare while you're still half in it. She explained that it had been a drug deal gone wrong, two groups who'd arranged to meet in the parking lot, neither trusting the other, both coming armed. 4 people were dead, 3 more in critical condition at the hospital. The hotel had just been collateral damage, wrong place for all of us staying there. She gave me her card, said I might need to give another statement later, maybe testify if it went to trial. The thought of reliving this in a courtroom made me want to throw up. Corporate put me up in a Marriott downtown for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. I sat on that pristine bed in that quiet room and shook for hours. Called Brian at 6 a.m., sobbing so hard he could barely understand me. He wanted to drive down immediately, but I told him I just needed to come home. Skip the last day of training. Funny how unimportant software tutorials seem after you've been shot at. The rental car company didn't even question why I needed a different vehicle. Guess they saw the news. That drive back to Ohio was the longest 3 hours of my life, jumping at every loud noise, pulling off twice because I was crying too hard to see the road. 2 weeks later, a victim's advocate called to check on me, gave me numbers for counselors who specialize in trauma. I went to a few sessions, and it helped some. The company offered to let me skip any future travel, and I took them up on it. These days, when I hear fireworks or a car backfire, my whole body tenses up. But I'm here, I'm alive, and that's more than 4 people from that parking lot can say. The night shift at the Grandview Hotel was supposed to be easy money. That's what my roommate told me when he got me the job. I was 22, fresh out of college with a useless philosophy degree, and desperate for anything that would help me pay rent while I figured out my life. It was a Thursday in early September, maybe around 2018, and I was only 5 days into the job. The hotel sat right off Highway 41, one of those mid-range places that business travelers used when they didn't want to pay downtown prices. During my training, the manager kept saying the night shift was mostly just staying awake and checking in the occasional late arrival. Nobody mentioned that the panic button under the desk hadn't worked in 3 months, or that the security guard position had been cut from the budget 2 weeks before I started. Around 2:47 a.m., this guy walked through the front doors. I remember the exact time because I just checked my phone, counting down the hours until my shift ended at 6. He looked completely ordinary, maybe mid-30s, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis like he'd been driving all day. Had one of those rolling suitcases, the kind with the broken wheel that makes that annoying clicking sound on tile floors. His driver's license said Robert Lawson, from somewhere in Missouri. He wanted a single room, paid cash for 3 nights up front, which wasn't unusual for that place. While I was counting his money and getting his keycard ready, he kept tapping his fingers on the counter in this weird rhythm, like he was playing an invisible piano. He asked me twice if I was working alone, which seemed odd, but I figured he was just making conversation. Gave him room 147 on the first floor, right down the hall from the lobby. After he left with his keycard, I went back to scrolling through my phone, trying to stay awake with some mindless YouTube videos. The lobby had these huge windows facing the parking lot, and the fluorescent lights inside made it impossible to see anything outside in the darkness. But we had this old monitor behind the desk, showing feeds from 4 security cameras, one in the parking lot, one in the main hallway, one by the side entrance, and one covering the lobby from behind me. About 10 minutes after Lawson checked in, movement on the parking lot camera caught my eye. He was standing by his car, a beat-up silver sedan parked directly in front of the main entrance. The way he was moving seemed strange, like he was checking if anyone was watching. He opened his trunk and pulled out what looked like a large duffel bag, different from the suitcase he'd brought in earlier. Then he unzipped it right there in the parking lot. The camera quality was terrible, all grainy and black and white, but I could see him pulling something out of that bag. At first I thought it might be a baseball bat or maybe a tire iron, but then he held it up to check something, and the parking lot light hit it just right. It was a shotgun, not a hunting rifle or anything you could maybe explain away. A short, mean-looking shotgun. He loaded something into it. I could see the motion even on that crappy camera, then tucked it under a long coat he pulled from the same bag. My whole body went rigid in that chair. He started walking toward the lobby entrance, and I could see him on the monitor getting bigger and bigger. The front doors were maybe 30 feet from my desk. The only other exit was through the back office, but that led to a hallway that connected right back to the main corridor where he could easily cut me off. I reached under the desk for the panic button, pressing it over and over, knowing it was broken but hoping maybe somehow it would work this time. The automatic doors whooshed open, and Lawson walked back in with that same casual stride, except now I knew what was hidden under his coat. He wasn't pointing anything at me yet, just walked up to the counter like he needed extra towels or something. "Hey, buddy," he said, and his voice was different now, lower and steadier. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to open that register and the safe in the back office. We're going to do this nice and quiet, and you're going to go home with a story to tell instead of a hole in your chest." His hand moved slightly under the coat, adjusting the weight of the gun. The weird thing was how calm he seemed, like he'd done this before, like robbing hotels at 3 a.m. was just another Thursday for him. I nodded, trying to speak, but my throat was completely dry. He smiled then, not a crazy smile, but worse. A practical, businesslike smile that said he'd already thought through every possible outcome of this situation. My mind was racing through my training, but they'd spent exactly 0 minutes on what to do during an armed robbery. The cash register had maybe $200 in it, mostly small bills from people buying snacks from the vending machines. The safe in the back had more, probably a few thousand, but I didn't even know the combination. Only the manager and the senior night auditor knew that, and Gregory, the night auditor, wasn't scheduled until tomorrow. I started moving toward the register, trying to buy time, trying to think. "The safe," I managed to croak out. "I don't have the combination. I'm new. They haven't given it to me yet." Lawson's expression didn't change. He leaned against the counter like we were having a casual conversation about the weather. "That's unfortunate," he said. "For you, I mean. Because I drove a long way for what's in that safe and I'm not leaving empty-handed. So you better start thinking real hard about how to open it, or we're going to have a different kind of conversation." I opened the register, my fingers fumbling with the keys, and started pulling out the cash. While I was doing that, I noticed something on the security monitor. A car had just pulled into the parking lot, a taxi. We sometimes got late arrivals from the airport, and sure enough, I saw an elderly couple getting out, the man pulling luggage from the trunk while the woman counted bills to pay the driver. They were heading straight for the lobby. Lawson must have seen my eyes flick to the monitor because he turned slightly to look at the parking lot through the windows. "Well," he said quietly, "this is about to get interesting." He shifted the shotgun under his coat and moved to the side of the counter where he'd be hidden from view when they first walked in. "You're going to check them in like everything's normal," he whispered. "One wrong word, one weird look, and I start with them, understand?" The automatic doors were already sliding open, and I could hear the woman complaining about the airline losing their bags. The couple approached the desk slowly, the man limping slightly with what looked like a bad knee. They were probably in their 70s, wearing matching Florida vacation shirts with palm trees on them. The woman, Dorothy she said her name was, did all the talking while her husband Harold just stood there looking exhausted. She wanted a room on the ground floor because of Harold's knee, and she kept apologizing for arriving so late, explaining their flight had been delayed 4 hours. The whole time she was talking, I could see Lawson in my peripheral vision, standing just 3 feet away behind that half wall that separated the desk area from the lobby. One step and he'd be visible to them. My voice sounded almost normal as I processed their credit card, but I could feel sweat running down my back, soaking through my uniform shirt. Dorothy kept chatting about their grandchildren in Phoenix, completely unaware that we were one wrong move away from disaster. I handed them their key cards, room 108, the opposite direction from where Lawson had checked in earlier. As soon as they disappeared down the hallway, Lawson stepped back into view. "Good job," he said, like I'd passed some kind of test. Now, about that safe. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to call your manager. Tell him there's an emergency, maybe a water pipe burst in the back office, flooding everywhere. He needs to come down here right now with the safe combination because important documents are getting soaked. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket and set it on the counter. Use this one, not the hotel phone. Don't want any recordings. I stared at the phone, knowing this would put my manager Russell in danger too. Russell was a decent guy, had 3 kids, always showed me pictures of his daughter's soccer games. I can't, I said, surprised by my own words. He won't believe me. A water pipe? He'll know something's wrong. Lawson's jaw tightened, the first sign of frustration I'd seen from him. He reached under his coat and I heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun being pumped. Not loud, but unmistakable in the quiet lobby. That's when I remembered something from my second day of training. Russell had mentioned the hotel kept a backup cash deposit in a hidden safe behind the breakfast area, separate from the main safe. It was for emergencies, usually about $5,000 in cash. He'd shown me where it was but said only to use it if the main safe malfunctioned, and we needed to make change for a big bill or something. The combination was written on a card taped inside the supply closet, which was stupid but typical for this place. Wait, I said quickly. There's another safe. Emergency cash. I know where it is and how to open it. Lawson studied my face, probably trying to figure out if I was lying. How much? He asked. $5,000, maybe more if they just made a deposit, I said. It was Thursday, so they might have deposited Wednesday's receipts. He considered this for a moment, then nodded. Show me. And remember, those old folks are still in the building. Would be a shame if I had to go knock on their door. We walked to the breakfast area, me in front, him staying close enough that I could smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. The breakfast room was creepy at night. All those empty tables and chairs set up for a meal that wouldn't happen for another 3 hours. The coffee machines were turned off, and the waffle makers sat there like metal mouths waiting to be fed. The supply closet was in the back corner, and my key card worked on it thankfully. Inside, behind boxes of paper cups and napkins, was the combination taped to the wall, just like Russell had shown me. EU07-3185, probably someone's birthday. The safe was built into the floor under a piece of loose carpet. As I knelt down to open it, I noticed something else in that closet, a heavy marble rolling pin from when the hotel used to make fresh pastries. It was on the shelf right next to me, covered in dust. Lawson was standing in the doorway, watching the breakfast room entrance, the shotgun now visible under his open coat. This was probably my only chance. My hand was on the safe dial, but I could reach that rolling pin without him noticing if I was careful. The safe clicked open, and there it was. Stacks of 20s and 50s, probably about 6,000 total. More than I'd expected. Lawson glanced down at the money, and for just a second his attention was completely on the cash. I grabbed the marble rolling pin and swung it as hard as I could at his knee, the bad one I'd noticed him favoring when he walked. The crack was horrible, like stepping on a thick branch, and he went down screaming. The shotgun clattered across the floor, sliding under one of the breakfast tables. I didn't even think, just ran. Ran straight through the lobby, past my desk, out the automatic doors into the parking lot. I could hear him screaming behind me, cursing and trying to get up. I made it to my car, a rusty Ford Focus, and fumbled with my keys. Started it on the 3rd try and peeled out of that parking lot faster than I'd ever driven. Called 911 from the road, told them everything. They caught him still in the breakfast room, trying to crawl to the shotgun with his destroyed knee. Turns out Robert Lawson wasn't even his real name, and he'd robbed 2 other hotels in neighboring states the same way. The elderly couple slept through the whole thing. I quit the next day, didn't even go back for my last paycheck. Sometimes I still dream about that breakfast room and the sound his knee made when I hit it. It was the middle of July when my sister Melissa and I decided to drive down to visit our grandmother in Alabama. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of nursing school, and Melissa had just turned 21 that spring. We'd been planning this trip for months, setting aside money from our part-time jobs and coordinating our vacation days. The plan was simple: split the 18-hour drive over 2 days, spend a week with Grandma helping her reorganize the house after Grandpa passed, then drive back home to Michigan. We'd done road trips together before, but this was our first time going this far south, just the two of us. The excitement of adventure mixed with the responsibility of being there for family made everything feel significant somehow. We'd been driving since dawn that first day, taking turns at the wheel every few hours, singing along to Melissa's meticulously curated road trip playlist. Around 9 that evening, exhaustion hit us both like a brick wall. We started seeing signs for lodging every few miles along Route 65, each promising clean rooms and continental breakfast. The Blue Ridge Motor Lodge caught our attention with its flickering neon vacancy sign and a price that wouldn't destroy our budget, $49 a night. The place sat about 200 yards from the highway, surrounded by nothing but dense woods and a gravel parking lot that crunched under our tires. The main office was a tiny building separate from the long, single-story row of rooms that stretched into the darkness. An older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose checked us in, handed us a key, attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with Room 12 etched into it, and mentioned she'd be leaving at 10 since her replacement called in sick. Room 12 was at the far end of the building, the last door before the parking lot dissolved into complete darkness. The exterior light above our door was burnt out, leaving only the distant glow from the office and a single street lamp near the ice machine to navigate by. Inside, the room smelled like old carpet and that generic cleaning product every cheap motel seems to use, somewhere between pine and bleach. 2 double beds with burgundy comforters took up most of the space, separated by a nightstand with a lamp that made a buzzing sound when you turned it on. Melissa immediately claimed the bed nearest the bathroom while I dropped our bags near the door. We'd packed light, just 2 duffel bags in our purses, planning to do laundry at Grandma's place. The AC unit beneath the window rattled to life when I adjusted the thermostat, drowning out most of the highway noise but adding its own mechanical rhythm to the room. After quick showers and changing into pajamas, me in an oversized University of Michigan shirt and shorts, Melissa in her collection of mismatched tank top and plaid pants, we settled in for the night. It was around 11 when we finally turned off the lights, both of us scrolling through our phones in the darkness, too wired from the drive to fall asleep immediately. The room's curtains were those thick, rubberized blackout kind, but they didn't quite meet in the middle, leaving a 2-inch gap that let in a sliver of parking lot light. I remember lying there, listening to the AC cycle on and off, occasionally hearing a car pass on the distant highway, thinking about what we'd do with Grandma the next day. Melissa's breathing had gotten steady and deep. She could fall asleep anywhere, anytime, a skill I'd always envied. That's when I heard the footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate, stopping right in front of our door. The footsteps just stood there, no knock, no voice, nothing. Through that gap in the curtains, I could make out the shadow of someone's legs. Then came the sound that made every muscle in my body tense up. The door handle slowly turning. Click, click, click. 3 deliberate attempts, testing if we'd locked it. Thank God we had. I reached over and grabbed Melissa's arm, whispering her name, but she just mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. The handle stopped moving, but the shadow didn't leave. Whoever it was just stood there, perfectly still, for what must have been 2 or 3 minutes but felt like hours. Part of me wanted to call out, ask who was there, but something deep in my gut told me to stay quiet. Maybe they had the wrong room. Maybe they were drunk. The shadow finally moved away, footsteps heading toward the parking lot. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes and reached for my phone to check the time. 11:17 p.m. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. People get confused at motels all the time, especially late at night. All those identical doors, barely visible room numbers. But I couldn't relax. Every little sound made me jump. The ice machine dropping cubes, a door slamming somewhere down the row, the AC kicking back on. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I was just starting to drift off when the footsteps returned. This time they weren't slow or hesitant. They were confident, purposeful. The handle turned again, more aggressively this time, rattling against the lock. Then came the knocking. Not polite, tentative knocks, but heavy, insistent pounding that shook the thin door in its frame. "Housekeeping," a man's voice called out, rough and slurred. At nearly midnight? No way. Melissa shot up in bed, instantly alert, her eyes wide in the darkness. We looked at each other, both of us knowing this wasn't right. "We don't need anything," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. The pounding stopped. Then, in a completely different tone, lower and clearer, "Just open the door, I know you're awake." Melissa grabbed her phone and immediately dialed 911 while I scrambled to push the dresser against the door. The operator answered just as the man outside started kicking the door, each impact making the cheap wood flex inward. "We're at the Blue Ridge Motor Lodge on Route 65, Room 12. Someone's trying to break in," Melissa practically screamed into the phone. The operator said units were on the way, but the nearest patrol was at least 15 minutes out. 15 minutes. The kicking stopped suddenly, replaced by something worse, the sound of metal scraping against metal near the lock. He was trying to jimmy it open. I ran to the window, yanking back the curtains to see if we could escape that way, but it was one of those safety windows that only opened about 4 inches at the top. Through the glass, I could see him now. A large man in a dark jacket, maybe 6'2", with a baseball cap pulled low. He had something in his hand, working it into the door frame near the lock mechanism. The parking lot was completely empty except for our car and an old pickup truck I hadn't noticed before, parked crooked across 2 spaces. The scraping stopped, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then he spoke again, his mouth close to the door. "Your car has Michigan plates. Long way from home. No one knows you're here, do they?" That's when real panic set in. He'd been watching us, planning this. Melissa was crying now, still on with 911, and I was trying to think of anything we could use as weapons. The lamp was bolted to the nightstand. The hangers were those useless rounded ones. Then I remembered the bottle of mace in my purse. Dad had insisted I carry it. I grabbed it just as we heard a crack. He'd gotten something through the door frame. The lock was starting to give. Without thinking, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Fire! Fire! Help! There's a fire!" Something I'd read once about how people respond more to fire than to calls for help. Melissa joined in, both of us screaming. A door opened somewhere down the row, then another. "What's going on?" someone yelled. The man at our door cursed, something guttural and angry, and the pressure on the door suddenly stopped. We could hear him running, heavy boots on concrete, heading toward the parking lot. I rushed to the window again and watched him sprint to the pickup truck. But instead of leaving immediately, he sat there in the driver's seat, engine running, lights off, just watching our room. Other guests had come outside now, an elderly couple from room 8, a woman with 2 kids from room 10, all looking confused and alarmed. The woman was on her phone, probably calling 911 too. But the man in the truck wasn't leaving. He was waiting. Melissa was explaining to the operator that he was still in the parking lot, and they told us to stay in the room, keep the door barricaded. Then, maybe 3 minutes later, he did something that still makes me sick to think about. He got out of the truck, walked calmly to the elderly couple, and started talking to them, gesturing toward our room. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he was pointing at our door, shaking his head, looking concerned, playing the victim somehow. The old man seemed to be buying it, nodding along. That's when I cracked the window and yelled, "He tried to break into our room. Don't believe him. We called the police." The man's head snapped toward our window, and even from 40 feet away, I could see his expression change, from fake concern to pure rage. He said something quick to the elderly couple and started walking back toward our room, not running this time, but striding with this terrifying determination. The elderly woman pulled her husband back inside their room. The mother grabbed her kids and disappeared too. It was just him, us, and the empty parking lot again. He came right up to our window this time, close enough that I could see he had pale eyes, maybe gray or light blue, and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm but with this underlying threat that made my skin prickle. I was just trying to help. Your friend texted me, said you needed help. What friend? We hadn't told anyone where we were staying. Before I could respond, he pulled out a phone and held it up to the window, showing a text conversation I couldn't quite read in the darkness. See? She sent me your room number, told me to come check on you. Neither of us had texted anyone. Melissa, still on with 911, was shaking her head frantically. This man was completely delusional, or an incredibly practiced liar. That's when we heard the sirens in the distance. The man's whole demeanor shifted instantly. He backed away from the window, that fake concerned expression completely gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Wrong room," he said flatly, like he was talking to himself more than us. Must have been the wrong room. He walked back to his truck with this unnatural calmness, taking his time like he had nothing to hide. But just before getting in, he turned back and looked directly at me through the window. He didn't say anything, just stared for maybe 5 seconds, like he was memorizing my face. Then he got in the truck and drove away. No rush, no squealing tires. Just pulled out of the parking lot and headed north on the frontage road, away from the approaching sirens. I kept watching until his taillights disappeared into the darkness, terrified he might circle back. The police arrived about 2 minutes after he left, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing, filling the parking lot with red and blue. Melissa finally stopped shaking enough to unlock the door and let them in. The officers took our statements, examined the door frame where he'd damaged it trying to break in, and put out a description of the truck and the man. They found scratches and tool marks on the lock mechanism, confirming someone had definitely tried to force entry. One officer, a younger guy named Officer Daniels, told us this was the 3rd report they'd had in 2 months about attempted break-ins at motels along this stretch of highway, always targeting women traveling alone or in pairs. They never caught the guy. The motel owner, who showed up about an hour later in pajamas and a windbreaker, moved us to a room right next to the office and had his son stay in the office all night to keep watch. We didn't sleep. We sat on one bed together, backs against the headboard, taking turns staying alert while the other dozed off for minutes at a time. At first light, around 5:30 a.m., we packed up, got in our car, and drove the remaining 8 hours to Grandma's house without stopping except for gas. We never found out who that man was or what he really wanted, though I can guess. I still think about those pale eyes sometimes, that calculated way he tried different tactics to get to us. We took a different route home, flying instead of driving, and I haven't stayed in a roadside motel since. I'm a traveling nurse, and last month I was driving through Nevada on my way to a new assignment in Colorado. It was getting late, around 11 p.m., and I'd already been on the road for 9 hours straight. My eyes were burning from staring at the endless stretch of highway, and I knew I needed to stop for the night. I pulled off at an exit that had a cluster of motels and gas stations. Nothing fancy, just the typical roadside setup you see in the middle of nowhere. I picked the Desert View Motel because it had the most cars in the parking lot, figuring that meant it was at least decent enough for other travelers. The place looked tired but clean, with faded turquoise paint peeling off the walls and a flickering neon sign that buzzed like angry wasps. I was exhausted, planning to grab maybe 6 hours of sleep before hitting the road again at dawn. The woman at the front desk had bleached blonde hair with dark roots showing and chewed gum while she processed my credit card. She handed me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with the number 217 on it, told me ice machines were at the end of each floor, and went back to watching something on her phone. Room 217 was on the 2nd floor, 3 doors from the stairwell. The hallway carpet had this nauseating pattern of burgundy swirls that probably hadn't been replaced since the 80s. I remembered dragging my suitcase past room 215, hearing a TV blaring through the thin walls, some game show with lots of applause and bells ringing. When I got into my room, it smelled like old cigarettes masked by cheap air freshener, that artificial cherry scent that makes your throat itch. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed without even pulling back the covers. just needing to close my eyes for a minute before I'd get up to shower. Maybe 20 minutes later, I woke up to voices coming through the wall from room 219. At first, it was just muffled conversation, a man and woman talking, nothing unusual. I figured they were just another couple passing through, maybe arguing about directions or where to eat tomorrow. But then the man's voice got louder, sharper, and I could make out some of the words. Ugly things, calling her stupid, worthless, saying she'd ruined everything again. The woman's voice was quieter, pleading, trying to calm him down. I've worked in enough emergency rooms to recognize that tone, that careful way people talk when they're trying not to set someone off. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, listening as his voice kept escalating. Then I heard the first crash, like something heavy hitting the wall, and the woman let out this strangled cry that made every hair on my arms stand up. The next few minutes were pure chaos on the other side of that wall. More crashes, the sound of glass breaking, furniture being thrown around. The woman was crying now, begging him to stop, and I could hear the terror in her voice. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but the dispatcher said they were 40 minutes out. Apparently, there were only 2 patrol cars covering this entire stretch of highway. 40 minutes. I couldn't just sit there for 40 minutes listening to this, so I called the front desk, thinking maybe they had some kind of security, or at least they could intervene somehow. The same gum-chewing woman answered, sounding annoyed that I'd interrupted her show. I told her what was happening, that someone was getting hurt in room 219, that she needed to do something right now. She sighed like I was asking her to move mountains, said she'd send someone up to check on it. About 2 minutes later, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway and a knock on their door. A man's voice, probably maintenance or security, asked if everything was all right in there. The fighting stopped immediately. There was this eerie silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then the abuser answered, his voice completely different now, calm, friendly even, saying they were just watching TV and sorry if it was too loud. The maintenance guy must have bought it because I heard him walking away. As soon as those footsteps faded, the abuser started yelling again. But this time, it wasn't at the woman. He was ranting about how someone had called to complain, how some nosy bitch had tried to get him in trouble. My whole body went rigid when I realized he was talking about me. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. It had to be the room next door. I'm gonna find out which one. Everything happened fast after that. I heard their door slam open so hard it bounced off the wall. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, going first to room 221 on the other side. He pounded on that door, but no one answered. They must have been empty. Then those footsteps came back, stopped right outside my door. The pounding started so hard I thought the door might actually crack. "I know you're in there," he yelled, his voice raw with rage. "You think you can call the cops on me? You think you can stick your nose where it doesn't belong?" His fists kept hammering the door, and he started kicking it too. The cheap motel door was shaking in its frame, and I could see the deadbolt straining against the wood. I backed away, grabbed my car keys and phone, trying to think straight while this maniac was trying to break down my door. The woman from 219 was in the hallway now too. I could hear her crying, begging him to come back to the room, telling him he was making things worse. I called 911 again, practically screaming at the dispatcher that he was trying to break into my room, that I needed help now. She said units were en route, still 25 minutes out, and asked if I could get to a safe location. Safe location? I was on the 2nd floor with only one stairwell nearby, and he was right outside my door. The window in my room had one of those safety stops that only let it open about 4 inches. No way I could squeeze through. The bathroom had no window at all, just a ventilation fan that rattled when you turned on the light. I could hear the wood around the deadbolt starting to splinter. He must have been over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker because the whole door frame was bending with each impact. The woman outside was screaming now, telling him the cops were coming, pulling on his arm, trying to get him away from my door. I heard him shove her hard. She hit the opposite wall with a thud and went quiet for a moment. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my life. I grabbed the desk chair, one of those heavy wooden ones, and wedged it under the door handle as an extra barrier. Then I called the front desk again. The woman answered on the first ring this time. She must have heard the commotion even from downstairs. I told her I was going to make a run for my car, that she needed to be ready to lock the lobby doors behind me if he followed. She started to protest, but I hung up and got ready. I put my car key between my fingers like I'd learned in a self-defense class years ago, tucked my phone in my pocket, and stood by the door listening. He was still pounding, but I could hear him getting winded, his breathing heavy and ragged. The woman was back on her feet, pulling on him again, and for just a moment he stepped back from my door to push her away again. That was my chance. I yanked the chair away, turned the deadbolt, and threw the door open. He was about 3 feet away, his back to me as he grabbed the woman by her shoulders. She had a swollen eye already turning purple, blood running from her nose onto a Garfield nightshirt that was ripped at the collar. The second he heard my door, he spun around and I got my first clear look at him. Maybe 35, unshaven, wearing jeans and a wife beater stained with what looked like beer. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, pupils dilated huge. The hallway reeked of alcohol and sweat. For half a second, we just stared at each other. Then I bolted toward the stairwell. I could hear him right behind me, his work boots thundering on that ugly carpet. I hit the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, using the railing to swing myself around the landing. My ankle twisted on the last step, but I kept going, adrenaline blocking out the pain. The parking lot was darker than I remembered, only a few yellow streetlights creating pools of dim light between long shadows. My car was parked in the middle section, a blue Nissan Altima that had never looked so beautiful. I could hear him burst through the stairwell door behind me, cursing and screaming threats about what he'd do when he caught me. The asphalt was still warm from the day's heat, and I remember the smell of oil and hot rubber as I sprinted between the cars. Other guests must have heard the commotion because I saw curtains moving in several windows, faces peering out, but nobody came to help. I made it to my car, fumbled with the key fob, and heard that blessed beep as the doors unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed the locks just as he reached the car. He started pounding on the driver's side window with both fists, his face inches from the glass, spit flying as he screamed at me. The window was vibrating so hard I thought it might shatter. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. He moved to the front of the car, slamming his palms on the hood, then picked up a rock from the landscaping and raised it over his head. That's when I got the engine started, threw it in reverse, and floored it. He had to jump back to avoid getting hit, and the rock went flying somewhere in the dark. I spun the wheel hard, tires screeching on the asphalt, and gunned it toward the exit. In my rearview mirror, I could see him running after me for a few seconds before giving up, standing in the middle of the parking lot with his arms raised, still yelling. The woman had come outside too, standing by the stairwell door, hunched over and holding her ribs. I wanted to stop for her, to take her with me, but I knew if I stopped he'd catch up. I had to leave her there, and that still eats at me. I drove straight to a well-lit gas station about 2 miles down the highway, and parked right in front of the doors where the cameras could see everything. Called 911 again, told them where I was, what had happened. While I waited, I called the motel and asked about the woman. The desk clerk said she'd gone back to the room with him, that they'd refused to open the door when the maintenance guy went back up. The police finally showed up about 15 minutes later, took my statement, said they'd send units to the motel. I found out later they arrested him for domestic battery and criminal threats, but the woman wouldn't press charges. She left with him the next morning. I think about her sometimes, wonder if she ever got away, if she's even still alive. I never stayed at a roadside motel again after that night. I'll drive exhausted for hours just to reach a proper hotel in a populated area. The sound of someone pounding on a door, any door, still makes me nauseous. I know I did the right thing by calling for help, but I learned that sometimes doing the right thing puts a target on your back. I was 34 when it happened, just another February night in 2017. I'd been selling medical equipment for about 6 years by then, covering most of the Midwest territory. The job meant spending at least 15 nights a month in different hotels, everything from decent chains to those sketchy motels where the ice machine never works, and the carpet has stains you don't want to think about. That particular Monday, I'd checked into a mid-range place just outside Minneapolis, one of those generic 3-story buildings with exterior corridors and doors that face the parking lot. Room 237, second floor, right next to the stairwell. I remember being exhausted after driving 7 hours from my previous appointment in Des Moines, barely managing to grab a burger from the drive-thru before collapsing into bed around 11. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. when I heard it. The distinctive click of a keycard reader accepting a card. You know that mechanical sound, the one that's followed by the green light and the heavy clunk of the lock disengaging. Except I hadn't ordered room service, hadn't called for anything, and housekeeping sure as hell doesn't come around at that hour. My brain tried to rationalize it at first, that foggy, half-awake state where you're not sure what's real. Maybe someone had the wrong room. Maybe it was the maintenance guy checking something. But then I heard the door handle turn, that slow, deliberate movement like someone was trying to be quiet. The door pushed open inch by inch, and the hallway light created this thin vertical line that gradually widened across the carpet. I stayed completely still, every muscle in my body tensing up like a coiled spring. Through barely open eyelids, I watched a figure step into my room. A man, probably 6 feet tall, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform, though something about it seemed wrong even in the dim light. He had this peculiar way of moving, taking these measured steps like he was counting them, and his head kept tilting at odd angles, as if he was listening for something. The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly the room was dark again, except for the faint glow from the alarm clock and the thin strip of light under the bathroom door I'd left on. He just stood there for what must have been 30 seconds, but felt like hours, and I could hear his breathing. Not heavy or labored, but deliberate, controlled, like someone practicing meditation. The strangest part was how methodical he was. He didn't rush to grab my wallet on the dresser or go for my laptop bag propped against the wall. Instead, he moved to the corner near the window and just waited. I could make out his silhouette against the curtains, standing perfectly still like he was part of the furniture. My phone was on the nightstand, maybe 18 inches from my right hand, but reaching for it would mean moving, and moving would mean he'd know I was awake. The rational part of my brain kept screaming at me to do something, to yell, to jump up, to grab the lamp and defend myself. But there was something about the way he carried himself, this eerie calmness that made me think he might have a knife or worse tucked into that uniform. Then he started doing something I'll never forget. He pulled out what looked like a small notebook and a pen light, the kind doctors use to check your pupils. The beam was narrow, focused, and he began scanning the room with it systematically. First the walls, then the floor, occasionally pausing to write something down. The light passed over my face twice, and both times I fought every instinct to flinch or close my eyes tighter. He spent extra time examining the area around my suitcase, even crouching down to inspect the zipper pulls without actually touching anything. When he aimed the light at the mirror above the dresser, I caught a glimpse of his face in the reflection. Mid-40s maybe, clean-shaven, with these deep-set eyes that seemed completely focused on whatever he was documenting. He had this small scar running through his left eyebrow, the kind you'd get from a bar fight or a childhood accident. After about 10 minutes of this bizarre inspection, he moved closer to the bed. I could smell him now, not body odor or cologne, but this weird chemical smell, like industrial cleaner mixed with something metallic. He stood at the foot of the bed, and I heard the notebook pages rustling as he wrote more notes. My left foot was maybe 6 inches from the edge of the mattress, and I became hyper-aware of it, terrified that any involuntary twitch would give me away. He started mumbling to himself, too quiet for me to make out the words, but the tone was conversational, like he was explaining something to someone who wasn't there. Then he did something that made my heart pound so hard I was sure he'd hear it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a hotel keycard, but it had all these wires attached to it, connected to some kind of small electronic device. He walked back to the door and inserted the modified key card into the reader. Instead of the usual beep, there was this series of rapid clicks, and then he opened the door slightly and wedged something under it. Looked like a rubber doorstop. The hallway was empty from what I could see, just the ugly geometric pattern carpet and the ice machine humming in the distance. He left the door cracked open about 2 inches and returned to his spot by the window. But this time he was facing the bed directly. I kept my breathing shallow, counting each inhale and exhale to keep them regular, fighting the urge to gulp air as panic crept up my throat. The worst part was not knowing what he was waiting for. Was someone else coming? Was he going to stand there all night? The uncertainty was eating at me, making every second stretch into eternity. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving quickly but quietly. Through the crack in the door, I saw shadows passing by, and then someone whispered something sharp and urgent. The man in my room responded with 3 distinct knocks on the wall, 2 quick, 1 slow, like some kind of signal. Suddenly, he moved with purpose, sliding something under my mattress near the headboard. I felt the mattress shift slightly from whatever he'd placed there, something flat and rigid. He then grabbed his notebook, shoved it in his pocket, and headed for the door. But before leaving, he turned back and stared directly at me for what must have been 5 full seconds. Even in the darkness, I could tell he was looking right at my face, and I used every ounce of willpower to keep my eyes steady, my breathing regular, playing dead better than I'd ever done as a kid. The door clicked shut and I heard multiple footsteps moving away down the corridor, then down the stairs. I stayed frozen for another 5 minutes, maybe 10. I couldn't tell anymore. My whole body was trembling now, adrenaline making my muscles twitch and jump. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I grabbed my phone and immediately called 911. While waiting for the police, I turned on every light in the room and checked under the mattress. What I found made no sense at all. A manila envelope sealed with a single word written on it: payment. Inside was exactly $3,000 in $100 bills and a business card with no name. Just a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. The bills looked real, felt real, even had consecutive serial numbers. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of drop? Had they used my room as a dead drop for something illegal? The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else at 4 in the morning. They took my statement, examined the room, bagged the money and card as evidence. One of them, Officer Hoffman, a guy about my age with tired eyes, told me they'd been having issues with identity theft rings using hotels for their operations. Apparently, these groups would break into rooms, plant evidence or contraband, then retrieve it later to avoid direct handoffs. But when they ran the keycard logs, things got weird. According to the hotel's system, no one had accessed my room after I checked in. The manager, this nervous woman named Angela who kept apologizing, swore their system was foolproof, that every entry was logged. She even showed us the computer records. According to their data, my door never opened between 11 p.m. when I entered and 4:15 a.m. when the police arrived. They moved me to another room for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about that modified keycard device, how it apparently bypassed the hotel's system completely. Around 6 a.m., Officer Hoffman called me with an update that made everything even stranger. The phone number on the card? It belonged to a medical equipment company in Illinois, the same company I was supposed to visit for a sales pitch that afternoon. When they contacted the company, the owner, a man named Douglas Crawford, claimed he'd never heard of me and had no appointments scheduled with any sales reps. But here's the thing. I had emails from him, dating back 3 weeks, setting up this exact meeting. When I showed the police the emails, they found that the domain was spoofed. The whole correspondence was fake. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months, orchestrating an elaborate scheme to get me to that specific hotel on that specific night. The police kept the money as evidence and told me they'd investigate further, but I could tell from their expressions they were as baffled as I was. I canceled all my appointments for the week and drove straight home to Wisconsin, checking my mirrors constantly, paranoid that someone was following me. Over the next few days, I discovered more inconsistencies. Charges on my company credit card for hotels I'd never stayed at, signed receipts with my signature for restaurants in cities I'd never visited, all from the past month. My company launched an internal investigation, but nothing ever came of it. The charges were reversed, the police case went cold, and officially, according to the hotel's records, no one ever entered my room that night. 6 months later, I quit that job and found work that didn't require travel. I still don't know what I was really caught up in that night, whether I was a random target or specifically chosen, whether that man knew I was awake the whole time. All I know is that sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I still hear that sound, the slow, deliberate turn of a door handle in the darkness. I worked the night shift at the Sunset Lodge for 6 years before everything changed. It was March of 2022, and I was 34, living in a small town in Montana where nothing exciting ever happened. The lodge sat right off Interstate 90, one of those budget places that truckers and families on road trips would use for a quick overnight stay. My job was simple enough: check people in, handle complaints about the ice machine, occasionally deal with drunk guests trying to sneak into the pool after hours. I lived in a studio apartment 5 minutes away, had a routine that never changed, and honestly thought I'd probably work there until I retired. The pay wasn't great, but the job was easy, and my manager, Frank, was decent enough to work for. Most nights I'd bring a book or watch Netflix on my phone during the dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m. when nobody ever showed up. Everything started with a news alert on my phone during a particularly slow shift in early April. A woman had been found dead at the Riverside Inn, about 40 miles east of us along the same interstate. The article didn't have many details, just that housekeeping had discovered her body when she didn't check out on time. I remember thinking it was sad, maybe a heart attack or something, and went back to my crossword puzzle. But then Frank called an emergency staff meeting the next afternoon, which was weird because he never called meetings. He looked different that day. His usually relaxed face was tight with worry, and he kept running his hand through his thinning hair while he talked. Apparently, the woman at the Riverside hadn't died of natural causes. She'd been murdered, and the police were telling all the hotels along I-90 to be extra vigilant about security. 2 weeks later, it happened again. The Pine Valley Motel, 60 miles west of us this time. Another woman, found in her room with no signs of forced entry, no struggle, nothing stolen. The news said both rooms had been cleaned so thoroughly that investigators couldn't find a single fingerprint that didn't belong to hotel staff. That detail stuck with me because I'd seen how people leave hotel rooms. They're usually disasters. Towels everywhere, trash overflowing, sheets twisted up like tornadoes hit them. But these rooms were spotless, like someone had spent hours scrubbing every surface with bleach. The victims were both traveling alone, both had checked in late at night, and both had paid in cash. The police started calling it a pattern, and suddenly every hotel worker along I-90 was on edge, watching every guest like they might be either the next victim or the killer. My shift on that Friday in late April started like any other. I got to work at 11 p.m., relieved Judith, who worked the evening shift, and settled in for what I expected would be another boring night of fighting to stay awake. The lodge had maybe 15 guests total. I could see it on our computer system. Room 106 had the Sinclair family with their 3 kids. 118 had an elderly couple who'd checked in around dinner time, and there were a handful of truckers scattered throughout the first floor. Around 1 a.m., a man walked through our front door, and I'll never forget the way he moved. It wasn't anything obviously wrong, but there was this calculated precision to his steps, like he was measuring each movement before he made it. He wore a plain gray jacket, dark jeans, and carried a simple black duffel bag that looked brand new, not a single scuff mark on it. He approached the desk with this peculiar smile, not friendly, not unfriendly, just perfectly neutral, like someone had taught him the exact angle his mouth should make to appear approachable. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray in the fluorescent lighting, and they never quite focused on my face when he talked. Instead, he seemed to be looking at a spot just past my left ear. "I need a room for the night," he said. And his voice had this flat quality to it, each word pronounced too carefully, like English wasn't his first language even though he had no accent. When I asked for his ID and credit card, he pulled out a wallet that was also brand new, the leather still stiff, no worn edges, no receipts or photos tucked inside. His driver's license said James Whitmore from Pennsylvania, but the picture barely looked like him. Not different enough that I could refuse it, but just enough that it made me pause. I gave him room 214, second floor at the far end of the hallway. As I handed him the key card, our fingers briefly touched, and his skin was oddly cold and completely dry, like shaking hands with someone wearing latex gloves. He thanked me with that same measured voice and headed for the elevator, his footsteps eerily silent on our worn carpet. I watched him on our security monitor as he went up to the second floor, and here's where things got strange. Instead of going straight to his room, he stood in the hallway for almost 5 minutes, just standing there, not checking his phone, not looking around, just standing perfectly still facing the wall. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, he suddenly moved again, walked to his door, and disappeared inside. The whole thing made me uncomfortable enough that I decided to do something I'd never done before in 6 years. I started watching the security cameras more closely. Around 2:30 a.m., a woman checked in. She was maybe 40, traveling alone, looked exhausted from a long drive. She wore a wrinkled business suit and kept yawning while I processed her registration. Her name was Diana Morrison, heading to Seattle for a conference, and she asked specifically for a quiet room away from the elevator. I had rooms available on the first floor, but something made me hesitate about putting her on the second floor near that man. Call it intuition or paranoia from all the recent news, but I gave her room 108 downstairs. She paid in cash, mentioned her credit cards were maxed out from business expenses, and headed to her room pulling a small red suitcase behind her. I went back to monitoring the cameras, switching between different views every few minutes. The man in 214 hadn't left his room, no lights showing under his door, nothing unusual, but I kept watching anyway. At exactly 3:15 a.m., I saw him emerge from his room on the monitor. He was wearing different clothes now, a black jacket and baseball cap that obscured his face from the cameras. But it was definitely him. I recognized that strange, measured walk. He didn't take the elevator this time. Instead, he used the stairs at the far end of the hallway, the ones that led down to the side exit near the parking lot. I switched camera views and watched him walk across the lot, but he didn't go to any car. He just walked to the edge where our property met the woods, stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned around and came back inside through the same door. This time, though, he didn't go back to his room. He went to the vending machine area on the first floor and stood there, not buying anything, just standing in that same unnaturally still way. From that position, I realized he had a clear view down the hallway where Diana Morrison's room was located. My mouth went dry as I watched him stand there for 20 minutes straight, never moving, never shifting his weight, just watching that hallway like a statue. I picked up the phone to call Frank, then put it down. What would I say? That a guest was acting weird by the vending machines? That wasn't illegal. I couldn't call the cops because someone gave me bad vibes. But then I remembered something from Frank's emergency meeting. The police had said both previous victims had called the front desk in the middle of the night to report someone trying their door handle. Both times, when security checked, nobody was there. I pulled up our door access log on the computer, something I'd only learned how to do during training but never actually used. Room 214 showed multiple exit and entry records, but what caught my eye was something else. The system showed key card attempts at 3 different rooms on the first floor. All declined, because his card only worked for 214. He'd been trying to get into other rooms. I immediately called the police. While the phone rang, I kept my eyes glued to the monitors, watching the man still standing by the vending machines. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. The recent murders, the strange guest, the attempted entries into other rooms. She said she'd send a patrol car to check things out, maybe 15 minutes. I hung up and looked back at the screen, but he was gone. My heart started pounding as I frantically switched between camera views. Nothing in the hallways, nothing in the parking lot, nothing in the stairwells. Then I heard it, the soft ding of the elevator arriving at the lobby, the elevator I could see on my screen, which showed it was empty. But I heard those doors open and close right there in the lobby with me. The sound came from maybe 20 feet away, but there was nobody there. I stood up from my chair, grabbing the baseball bat Frank kept under the desk, and that's when all the lights in the lobby went out. The emergency lighting kicked in after 2 seconds, casting everything in a dim red glow. My computer was still running on battery backup, the screens providing the only real light. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction of the first-floor hallway. Not from the elevator, but from the corridor that led to Diana Morrison's room. I gripped the bat tighter and moved toward the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to run, but knowing I couldn't leave Diana or the other guests in danger. As I reached the corner, I saw him at the far end of the hallway, trying Diana's door handle. She must have heard it because I heard her voice from inside, asking who was there. He didn't answer, just kept slowly turning the handle, testing it. I shouted at him to step away from the door, and he turned to look at me. In the red emergency lighting, his face looked completely blank, no expression at all, like a mannequin. He started walking toward me with that same measured pace, and I raised the bat, yelling that the police were on their way. He stopped about 10 feet from me and tilted his head slightly, like a dog hearing a strange sound. Then he spoke, and his voice was different now. No longer flat, but almost melodic, rehearsed. You should have minded your own business. Check in, check out, that's all you needed to do. He reached into his jacket and I swung the bat without thinking, pure adrenaline taking over. I missed him completely, but it made him step back. We stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably seconds. And then I heard the beautiful sound of sirens approaching. His head snapped toward the front entrance, and without another word, he turned and ran. Not that measured walk anymore, but a full sprint toward the side exit. I ran after him, still carrying the bat, and saw him disappear into the woods just as the police cars screeched into our parking lot. They found him 3 hours later, hiding in a drainage pipe about a mile away, still carrying his black duffel bag filled with cleaning supplies, zip ties, and a collection of hotel key cards from different chains. Turns out his real name was Vincent Garrett, and he'd been a night janitor at a hotel chain for 15 years before they laid him off. The police said he'd developed an obsession with hotel cleanliness and had some twisted idea about purifying hotels of solo female travelers he deemed unworthy of the rooms. He'd been using stolen master key cards and employee access codes he'd collected over the years, which explained how he got into those other hotels without forcing entry. The FBI linked him to 5 murders across 3 states, all along major interstate routes. Diana Morrison was safe, though she was pretty shaken up when she learned how close she'd come to being victim number 6. I quit the Sunset Lodge 2 months later, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't walk those hallways without seeing him standing there in that unnatural way. Frank understood, gave me a good reference, and I work at a bookstore downtown now. Sometimes I'd drive past the lodge and see new people working the night shift through the window, and I wonder if they know what almost happened there. I never told the full story to anyone except the police, and now you folks here. I still have nightmares sometimes about that empty elevator dinging in the lobby, but at least I know he's serving multiple life sentences without parole. They never did figure out how he made the lights go out that night, but honestly, I don't want to know. I had been staying at a mid-range hotel during a work trip, the kind of place with beige carpets that always smelled faintly like lemon cleaner no matter the hour. At the time, I was juggling long shifts and trying to prepare a presentation, so most evenings I'd return exhausted, just grateful that the bed was made and fresh towels were waiting. The housekeeper on my floor was a woman named Marlene. She wasn't chatty, but she had this habit of humming softly while pushing her cart, a tune I never recognized but always seemed to repeat itself day after day. It became part of the background of my stay, almost comforting in a strange way. The last evening before things went bad, I came back later than usual, close to midnight. The hallway lights buzzed like they hadn't been replaced in years, and the air felt heavy, like the AC wasn't circulating properly. Marlene's cart was parked outside one of the corner rooms, but she wasn't there. I thought it was odd since housekeeping usually wrapped up hours earlier, but I figured maybe someone requested extra service. Her cart looked messy, bottles of cleaner tipped over, rags half hanging out of the bag. I didn't see her, so I kept walking, but the image stuck with me longer than I expected. The next morning, the lobby had this uneasy energy. Guests whispered at the check-in desk, and staff moved faster than usual, heads down, avoiding eye contact. When I asked the front desk about late checkout, the clerk gave me a distracted nod, like she hadn't actually heard what I said. Then I caught something unusual. 2 men in suits, not guests, heading toward the service hallway with a manager trailing behind. Their shoes clicked loudly on the tile, and the sound carried until a door shut behind them. That was when the rumor started circling. Marlene hadn't shown up for her shift, and nobody knew where she was. Later that afternoon, police cars pulled up out front. Their presence was impossible to ignore, flashing lights painting the lobby walls in red and blue. Word spread fast. Blood had been found in the back hallway, near the service area where the carts were kept. Someone said it wasn't a small spill either, but a streak that smeared along the wall, as if something had been dragged. People gathered near the elevators, speculating in low voices. But when I asked one of the staff if Marlene was okay, she looked at me for a long moment and just said, "Go back to your room." That answer didn't sit right with me at all. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing her abandoned cart, the bottles rattling when I walked by. Around 3 a.m., I went down to grab a soda from the vending machine near the stairwell. On my way back, I noticed a section of the service hallway taped off with yellow police tape. No one was guarding it, but the silence there was suffocating, like even the hum of the ice machine cut out when I got close. I didn't linger. I practically jogged back to my room. By the next morning, the police presence had doubled. Guests waiting for rides stood by the entrance, clutching their luggage like they couldn't get away fast enough. That's when I overheard 2 officers near the front desk asking about a guest who had checked out at dawn. Apparently, he'd left in such a hurry that he skipped breakfast, rushed past the night clerk, and barely signed his name on the slip. The oddest part was his rental car, still sitting in the lot, keys on the driver's seat, door unlocked. Nobody could explain why he'd leave it like that. Later in the day, while waiting for my ride to the airport, I passed near the maintenance door and glimpsed one of the detectives speaking with the manager. The detective held a clipboard and kept pointing toward the hallway where the blood was found. The manager looked pale, nodding quickly but saying nothing. I wanted to ask, but before I could, the detective's eyes flicked toward me, and I immediately looked away, pretending to fuss with my phone. Something about his stare made it clear guests weren't supposed to know more than we already did. When I finally checked out, the woman at the desk barely spoke. She slid the receipt toward me without looking up, her nails drumming the counter. Behind her, I noticed Marlene's name tag sitting alone in a tray, the plastic cracked like it had been tossed carelessly. That detail stuck with me more than anything else, like a quiet admission that she wasn't coming back. As my cab pulled away, I glanced at the rental car still in the lot, baking under the sun, the windshield catching the light. The sight left me with more questions than answers, and I knew I'd never look at hotel hallways the same way again. A week after I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried searching the local news, but all I found were vague headlines. Investigation ongoing at downtown hotel, and authorities tight-lipped after incident. No mention of Marlene by name, just a staff member. It bothered me. She wasn't just a staff member. She was a real person with a voice I could still hear in my head, humming that same repetitive tune. The anonymity made the whole thing feel even darker, like she had been erased. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I called the hotel pretending I was looking to book again, hoping maybe they'd slip some detail. The woman on the phone hesitated when I asked if Marlene still worked there. She said quietly, "We don't have anyone by that name," and then rushed to transfer me to reservations. It was the way she said it, clipped and final, like a door slamming shut. I didn't push further. I knew I wouldn't get answers that way. The part that still gnaws at me is the rental car. I read online that it stayed in the lot for weeks before the company finally towed it. People speculated the man who checked out left on foot or got picked up by someone. Nobody could understand why he'd abandoned the car like that. It feels connected, too connected to ignore. The timing, the blood, Marlene disappearing the same night he left, it all lines up too neatly. I still travel for work, but I'll never forget that hotel. Every time I walk past a housekeeping cart now, I catch myself scanning for the person behind it, listening for that soft humming that became so familiar. I've learned that sometimes the scariest things don't happen in abandoned buildings or dark forests. They happen in bright hallways where you least expect it. I'll never know what really happened to Marlene, but one thing I'm certain of, something terrible unfolded behind those service doors, and it wasn't just an accident. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October in Colorado gets dark earlier than people expect, and by 4:30 that Thursday afternoon, shadows were already stretching across our kitchen floor when I got home from school. I was 15, a sophomore at Ridgeview High, and had just started getting rides home with my friend Jenna's older brother since soccer practice had moved to mornings. My dad worked as an engineer at a tech firm downtown, usually getting home around 6:30, and my mom managed a dental office 40 minutes away, which meant she rarely made it back before 7. We lived in one of those newer developments off Highway 6, where every house had the same basic floor plan, but different colored siding. Ours was pale gray with white trim. The neighborhood was quiet on weekdays, mostly families with young kids who were still at daycare, or older folks who kept to themselves. That afternoon felt completely ordinary. I'd grabbed the mail from the box, dumped my backpack by the stairs, and was heating up leftover pizza in the microwave when I heard the back door creak open. The guy my parents had hired for odd jobs around the house was named Brett, and he'd been coming by for about 6 months whenever something needed fixing. He was maybe 38 or 40, hard to tell exactly, with premature gray streaking through his brown hair and rough hands that always had grease or paint under the fingernails. He wore the same faded blue coveralls every time I saw him, with his name stitched in red thread on the front pocket, though the letters were coming loose at the edges. My mom found him through a neighborhood Facebook group when our fence started falling apart after a bad storm. He charged half what the professional contractors wanted and didn't mind being paid in cash. Brett had fixed the fence, retiled the downstairs bathroom, cleaned the gutters, and just last Saturday had finished installing heavy-duty shelving units in our garage. My dad had paid him that same day. I remembered because Brett had counted the bills twice at our kitchen table while I was doing homework, licking his thumb between each 20. "Mom!" I called out, even though her car wasn't in the driveway, and she never came home this early anyway. The microwave beeped behind me, but I didn't move to get the pizza. Our back door opened directly into a small mudroom that connected to the kitchen, and from where I stood by the counter I could see straight through to whoever was coming in. Brett appeared in the doorway, still wearing those same coveralls, but something about him seemed different. Maybe it was the way he didn't knock first or call out to announce himself like he usually did. He just stood there for a moment, his bulk filling the frame before stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The automatic porch light hadn't turned on yet, so his face was partially shadowed, but I could see he was carrying his old red toolbox, the one with the broken latch that he had to hold closed with his hand. "Hey there, kiddo," he said, using that nickname I'd always hated but never corrected him about. His voice sounded thicker than usual, like he'd been sleeping or maybe drinking, though it was hard to tell. "Didn't mean to startle you. Left my good drill in the garage on Saturday, the DeWalt one. Your folks said I could swing by and grab it whenever." That might have been true, except my parents were meticulous about communication, and they always texted me if someone was stopping by when I'd be home alone. I pulled out my phone to check, but there were no messages from either of them. Brett was already walking through the kitchen toward the door that led to the garage, his work boots leaving faint dirt prints on my mom's clean floor. The way he moved seemed too casual, too comfortable, like he belonged here. I followed him to the garage door, keeping my phone in my hand. "I can get it for you," I offered, trying to sound normal even though my mouth had gone dry. "Just tell me where you left it." Brett turned the doorknob but didn't open the door yet. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and I noticed a smell coming off him. Not alcohol exactly, but something sharp and chemical, like paint thinner or gasoline. His toolbox made a metallic rattling sound as he adjusted his grip on it. "Nah, I got it. Might be a few other things I left too. Been doing so many jobs lately, hard to keep track of all my tools." He opened the door and flicked on the garage light, but instead of going straight to the shelves he'd installed, he stopped and scanned the space slowly, like he was memorizing it. My dad's mountain bike hung on the wall. My mom's gardening supplies were organized in clear bins, and there were boxes of Christmas decorations stacked in the corner. The garage felt colder than usual, and I realized the side door that led to the backyard was slightly ajar, moving just enough in the breeze to make a soft scraping sound against the frame. Brett must have come in that way, which meant he'd walked around the entire house instead of coming to the front door like a normal person would. "Actually," he said, setting his toolbox down on my dad's workbench with a heavy thud, "might take me a minute to find everything. Had a bunch of drill bits too, specialty ones. Why don't you go back inside where it's warm?" He wasn't even pretending to look for a drill anymore. Instead, he was opening drawers in the workbench, pulling things out and setting them aside like he was taking inventory. My dad kept cash in one of those drawers, in an old Altoids tin. Emergency money, he called it, usually about $200. I watched Brett's hands getting closer to that particular drawer, and that's when I decided to lie. "My dad's on his way home early today," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "He texted me like 10 minutes ago. Had to leave work for a dentist appointment, so he'll be here any minute." Brett's hands stopped moving. He looked up at me, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he made real eye contact. His eyes were bloodshot with dark circles underneath, and there was a small cut on his left cheek that looked fresh, maybe a day or two old. "That right?" he asked, his tone flat and unreadable. He abandoned the drawer he'd been about to open and picked up his toolbox again, but he didn't move toward the door. Funny, I drove by his office on my way here, saw his truck in the parking lot. My pulse hammered in my ears. How did he know where my dad worked? Had he been watching us, learning our routines? "He's using my mom's car today," I said quickly. "His truck needed an oil change." Brett made a humming sound, that same tuneless humming he always did while working, except now it sounded menacing in the cold garage. He walked past me back into the house, and I had no choice but to follow. But instead of heading toward the back door where he'd entered, he turned left into our living room. "Just remembered," he said, running his free hand along the back of our couch. "I might have left some screws on the mantel when I was checking that loose panel above your fireplace last month." There had never been any loose panel. He'd never worked in our living room. I stayed in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, calculating distances. The front door was too far. He'd catch me before I could unlock it. The back door was closer, but he was between me and it now. My phone was still in my hand, but calling 911 would take too long. And what would I even say? That our handyman was looking for his tools. He picked up a family photo from the mantel, the one from our vacation to Yellowstone last summer, and studied it carefully. "Nice picture," he said. Your mom looks young here. She's still wearing her hair like that? The question made bile rise in my throat. The sound of footsteps upstairs made us both freeze. Heavy footsteps, deliberate and slow, moving from one room to another directly above us. Brett's eyes flicked to the ceiling, then back to me. "Thought you said you were alone," he said quietly, setting the photo down with exaggerated care. My mind raced. I knew nobody was upstairs. I'd been home for 20 minutes and would have heard someone. But the footsteps continued, and then we heard a door slam hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. Brett's whole demeanor changed. His shoulders tensed and he gripped his toolbox tighter, the knuckles on his hand going white. "Who's up there?" he demanded, taking a step toward me. I backed into the kitchen, my hip hitting the counter. "I don't know," I said truthfully, and my confusion must have been genuine enough because he seemed to believe me. Another door slammed upstairs, then another, like someone was going room to room, and suddenly I understood. My neighbor, Mrs. Zhao, had a key to our house for emergencies. She was 73, sharp as a tack, and had probably seen Brett's unfamiliar vehicle in our driveway. "I should go," Brett said abruptly, but he didn't move toward either exit. Instead, he stood perfectly still, listening to the footsteps that were now heading toward the stairs. The person up there was making as much noise as possible, and I heard what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. Brett's breathing had gotten heavier, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool October air. "Tell your parents I'll come back another time for my drill," he said, already backing toward the mudroom. "When they're home." The footsteps started down the stairs, slow, heavy, deliberate. Each step creaked loudly, which was strange because our stairs never creaked. Brett didn't wait to see who it was. He turned and walked quickly through the kitchen, his toolbox banging against his leg. I heard the back door open and close and then the sound of feet running across our backyard. I stayed pressed against the kitchen counter, afraid to move, as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Mrs. Zhao appeared in the doorway, holding my old aluminum baseball bat from middle school in one hand and her phone in the other. Her usually neat silver hair was disheveled and she was breathing hard from rushing over. "I saw him creeping around the side of your house," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "Called the police already. They're on their way." She'd been watching from her kitchen window while making her afternoon tea. Saw Brett trying the side gate first, then walking around to the back. What really alarmed her was that she'd seen him sitting in his van at the end of our street for almost an hour before he approached the house, just watching. She'd found the spare key my mom had given her and came in through the front door while I was in the garage with Brett, then made all that noise on purpose. "I figured if he thought someone else was here, someone bigger and scarier than you or me, he might leave," she explained, still gripping the bat. We waited together in the kitchen until the police arrived, and I called my parents while Mrs. Zhao gave her statement to the officers. They found Brett's van abandoned 2 streets over with the engine still running. Inside, the police discovered he'd been recently evicted from his apartment, had been living in the van for weeks, and had a notebook with information about several families he'd worked for, their schedules, when kids were home alone, where they kept spare keys, even details about valuable items in their homes. Our address had multiple pages of notes, including the fact that I was usually alone from 3:45 to 6:30 on weekdays. The DeWalt drill he claimed to have left was sitting right there in his van, along with several other tools that he'd probably stolen from other clients. He was arrested 3 days later trying to break into another house 2 towns over, one where he'd installed a ceiling fan the previous month. The family's teenage son was homesick from school, but Brett hadn't known about the change in routine. We never found out what he'd planned to do that Thursday afternoon at our house, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. My parents installed a security system the next week, changed all the locks, and we never hired anyone from Facebook groups again. Mrs. Zhao still watches our house when I'm home alone, and I keep her number on speed dial. Sometimes I still hear phantom footsteps upstairs when I'm by myself, but now I know it's just the old house settling, not someone coming to help me. Living alone in a duplex in suburban Milwaukee wasn't supposed to be permanent. I'd moved there in August 2018 after my divorce, just needing something cheap and quiet while I figured out my next move. The place was nothing special. Beige walls, outdated kitchen, one of those sliding glass doors to a tiny backyard that I never used. I was working nights at a warehouse back then, which meant I slept during the day and spent most evenings just killing time before my shift. The neighborhood was boring in the best way possible. Families with kids, retired couples who kept their lawns perfect, everyone minded their own business. That Tuesday in early September started like any other day off. I'd woken up around 3 p.m., made some coffee, and realized I needed to grab a few things from the 7-Eleven about 4 blocks away. The convenience store run should have taken 10 minutes, tops. I parked in the nearly empty lot and was walking toward the entrance when these two guys came out. The first one was tall and skinny, maybe early 30s, wearing a faded Packers jersey that hung loose on his frame. His buddy was shorter, stockier, had this weird bleached patch in his otherwise dark hair, like he'd started dyeing it and given up halfway through. They were carrying cases of beer and heading to a beat-up Chevy Tahoe. As I passed them, the tall one bumped into me, hard enough that I stumbled. When I turned around, he was grinning at me with these yellowed teeth and said something like, "Watch where you're going, princess." His friend laughed, this high-pitched giggle that didn't match his build at all. I just kept walking, but I could feel them staring at me. Inside the store, I could see them through the window, still standing by their truck, passing a cigarette back and forth and looking in my direction. I grabbed what I needed, milk, bread, some frozen dinners, trying to shake off the weird encounter. The cashier, this kid named Brandon who I'd seen there 100 times, must have noticed something was up because he asked if everything was all right. I told him it was nothing, just some drunk idiots in the parking lot. But when I went to leave, their Tahoe was still there, engine running now, parked right next to my Ford Ranger. The tall guy was in the driver's seat, window down, that same stupid grin on his face. As I loaded my stuff into my truck, he leaned out and said, "Nice truck, princess. Bet you got a nice place too." The way he said it made my skin prickle. His friend was recording me with his phone, holding it up obviously, wanting me to see. I didn't respond, just got in my truck and backed out carefully, watching them in my rearview mirror the whole time. They followed me for about 2 blocks before turning off onto a side street. I took a longer route home just to be safe, circling through the neighborhood twice before pulling into my driveway. The rest of the afternoon was normal. I made dinner, did some laundry, called my brother in Phoenix to talk about nothing important. By the time it got dark around 7:30, I'd almost forgotten about those guys. I settled into my recliner to watch the Brewers game, had a couple beers, was actually starting to relax. My living room faces the front of the house with these thick blinds I usually kept closed at night. The TV was the only light on, casting those flickering shadows you get during night games. Around 10:45, bottom of the 8th inning, I heard a car door slam somewhere close. Not unusual. My neighbor Paul worked odd hours too. But then I heard footsteps on my driveway. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the gravel, like someone trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. I muted the TV and sat perfectly still, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my front window. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Through a tiny gap in the blinds, I could see 2 figures on my driveway. The streetlight at the end of my driveway lit them up just enough. It was them, the tall one and his buddy with the bleached patch. They were both wearing dark gloves now, the rubber kind you'd wear to wash dishes. The tall one was looking at my front door while the shorter one was scanning the windows. I slid out of my recliner as quietly as I could, staying low, and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. My first instinct was to call 911, but I hesitated. What if they heard me talking? What if they ran before the cops arrived and came back another night when I wasn't expecting them? As I crouched there behind my couch, I heard the doorknob rattle. They were trying the lock. The sound of metal scratching against metal came next. They were picking the lock or trying to jimmy it somehow. I crawled on my hands and knees to the hallway, staying out of sight from the windows. My bedroom was at the back of the house, and I kept my grandfather's old Remington 870 in the closet. I'd never pointed it at anyone before, Never even thought I'd have to. As I grabbed it and checked that it was loaded, I heard them talking outside, their voices muffled but clear enough. The short one was saying something about checking the back door. That's when real panic set in. The sliding glass door in my kitchen had a flimsy lock that barely worked. If they went around back, they'd be inside in seconds. I positioned myself at the corner of the hallway, where I could see both the front door and the kitchen. The gun felt heavy and cold in my sweaty hands. Through the kitchen, I could see a flashlight beam sweeping across my backyard. I heard the sliding door handle jiggle, then that distinctive sound of someone trying to force it up and over the track. My mouth went completely dry. I pumped the shotgun once. That unmistakable cha-chunk sound echoed through the quiet house. Everything stopped. The flashlight beam froze, pointing at my kitchen floor through the glass. For maybe 10 seconds, nobody moved. Then I heard rapid footsteps running along the side of my house back toward the front. I rushed to the living room window and peeked out just in time to see them sprinting to their Tahoe. The tall one looked back at my house once before jumping in. They peeled out so fast they left rubber marks on the street that were still there weeks later. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, gun still raised, waiting to make sure they were really gone. My whole body was shaking with adrenaline. When I finally felt safe enough to move, I called 911 and turned on every light in the house. The cops showed up about 15 minutes later. 2 officers who looked barely older than the cashier at 7-Eleven. They found pry marks on my front door and footprints all around my property. The back door showed clear signs someone had tried to force it. One officer, Officer Nowak, took pictures while his partner asked me questions. I told them about the encounter at the store, described the men, even mentioned the filming. Nowak said they'd check if the 7-Eleven had security footage. They stayed for about an hour, told me to consider getting better locks, maybe a security system. After they left, I dragged my recliner into my bedroom and sat there until sunrise with the shotgun across my lap. I called in sick to work. There was no way I was leaving the house that night. Around 6 a.m., I finally dozed off for a couple hours. When I woke up, I immediately went online and ordered new deadbolts, a security camera system, and motion sensor lights. The next few days were rough. I'd jump at every little sound, check the locks constantly, look out the windows every few minutes. I installed the new deadbolts myself, spent a whole Saturday setting up the cameras and lights. Paul from next door saw me up on a ladder and came over to help. When I told him what happened, he mentioned he'd seen a Tahoe driving slowly past our houses a few times that week before the attempted break-in. Said he didn't think much of it at the time, figured someone was lost. That detail made me sick to my stomach. They'd been planning this, watching my routine, knowing when I'd be home alone. I started parking my truck in different spots, varying when I left for work, being hyper-aware of any vehicle that seemed to be following me. The paranoia was exhausting. I'd check the camera feeds obsessively on my phone during work breaks, sometimes calling in favors with coworkers to drive by my house during their lunch breaks, just to make sure everything looked normal. About 2 weeks later, Officer Nowak called with an update. They'd arrested both men after they tried to break into another house 3 neighborhoods over. The homeowner there had a German Shepherd that went absolutely ballistic when they tried the back door, woke up the whole family. The husband held them at gunpoint until police arrived. Turns out they had a whole operation going. They'd stake out houses, figure out when people were alone, then break in looking for electronics, cash, prescription drugs. The tall one was named Robert Henley, had a record going back years for burglary and assault. His partner was Vincent Russo, mostly petty theft before this. They found videos on Russo's phone of at least 12 different houses, including mine. The prosecutor said I'd probably have to testify if it went to trial, but both ended up taking plea deals. Henley got 3 years, Russo got 18 months. Even with them locked up, it took months before I could sleep properly again. I'd still wake up at every creak, every car door, every dog bark in the neighborhood. I ended up getting a dog myself, a rescue pit bull mix named Brutus who barks at everything and sleeps at the foot of my bed. Funny thing is, he's actually a total softie, scared of the vacuum cleaner and loves belly rubs, but he makes me feel safer. I stayed in that duplex for another year before finding a better place, a second-floor apartment with only one entrance and a doorman. Some people think I overreacted, that I should have just called the cops right away that night instead of grabbing the gun. Maybe they're right. But when you're alone in your house and you hear someone trying to break in, someone you know has been watching you planning this, your brain doesn't exactly work through all the rational options. You just react. That sound of the shotgun pumping probably saved me from whatever they had planned, and I don't regret it for a second. I still see that Tahoe sometimes in my dreams, still hear those footsteps on gravel when I'm half asleep. The security system at my new place is probably overkill. Cameras, smart locks, motion sensors, the works. But it helps me sleep. I ran into Brandon from the 7-Eleven last month at a Bucks game. He remembered that day, said those two guys had been hanging around the store for hours before I showed up, already drunk and looking for trouble. He felt bad he didn't warn me somehow. I told him it wasn't his fault. Nobody could have predicted they'd follow me home and try to break in. But here's the thing that still gets me. If I hadn't gone to the store that specific afternoon, if I'd gone an hour earlier or later, none of this would have happened. They picked me randomly, just wrong place, wrong time. That's what keeps me up sometimes. How quick your whole sense of safety can disappear just because you needed milk and bread on a Tuesday afternoon. Most people don't know what real fear feels like until they're 16 and alone, in a house that suddenly feels too big, too quiet, too exposed. It was a Saturday afternoon in early June 2016, one of those lazy summer days where the heat makes everything move in slow motion. My parents had driven up to Boston for their college reunion weekend, leaving me in charge of our 2-story colonial in a quiet Connecticut suburb. I was sprawled on the living room couch, halfway through a Netflix binge and a family-size bag of Doritos, feeling pretty good about having the whole place to myself. The air conditioning hummed steadily, drowning out most of the neighborhood sounds, and I remember thinking how perfect everything was. No annoying little brother, no parents asking about homework, just me and 6 more episodes of whatever show I was obsessed with that summer. Around 4:30, I heard knocking at the front door. Not the doorbell, which was weird because everyone who came to our house used the doorbell. The knocking had this specific rhythm to it. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more taps, like someone trying to be polite but persistent. Then I heard it. "Hey kiddo, it's Uncle Steve. Can you let me in?" I locked myself out of my car and my phone's dead. The voice was muffled through the heavy oak door, but it sounded exactly like him. That slight Boston accent he never quite lost. The way he stretched out the word kiddo like he always did. Uncle Steve lived about 20 minutes away and dropped by all the time, usually unannounced, always bringing those butterscotch candies I pretended not to like anymore but secretly still loved. My first instinct was to jump up and unlock the door, but something made me hesitate. Mom had mentioned something that morning about Uncle Steve being in Vermont for the week, visiting his girlfriend's family at their cabin. I walked slowly to the front door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and peered through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted everything, but I could see a figure standing there wearing a baseball cap pulled low and what looked like Uncle Steve's favorite Navy windbreaker, the one with the faded Red Sox logo on the chest. The thing is, the porch light wasn't on, and the late afternoon sun was hitting at just the wrong angle, casting shadows across his face. "Come on, sweetheart," the voice continued, and I felt my chest tighten. Uncle Steve never called me sweetheart. It was always kiddo or squirt when he was being extra annoying, but never sweetheart. "I know you're in there. I saw your car in the driveway." That made me pause even more because I didn't have a car. I'd just gotten my permit 3 weeks ago and wasn't allowed to drive alone yet. The figure shifted, and for just a second, I caught a glimpse of his hand reaching up to adjust the cap, and his fingers looked wrong somehow. Too thick, too long, with these yellowish nails that Uncle Steve definitely didn't have. "Listen, I really need to use the bathroom," the voice said, and now it sounded strained, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. Remember last Thanksgiving when you spilled cranberry sauce all over Grandma Dorothy's tablecloth, and I helped you clean it up before your mom noticed? I didn't tell anyone about that. Come on, just open up for a minute. My whole body went rigid. We did have a cranberry sauce incident last Thanksgiving, but it wasn't Grandma Dorothy's tablecloth. She'd been dead for 3 years. It was Aunt Marie's tablecloth, and Uncle Steve hadn't been there to help because he'd been outside smoking with my dad. Whoever was standing on our porch knew enough about our family to get close, but not enough to get it right. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. The knocking came again, harder this time, more insistent. I can hear you moving around in there. Don't be rude to your uncle. My fingers fumbled with the phone as I tried to call my mom, but the call went straight to voicemail. She'd warned me the reunion venue had terrible reception. Dad's phone did the same thing. I thought about calling 911, but what would I even say? There's someone at my door pretending to be my uncle. The knocking turned into pounding now, making the decorative wreath on the door shake. All right, I didn't want to worry you, but I think I'm having a medical issue here, the voice said, and suddenly it sounded weaker, breathless. My chest, it's those pills I forgot to take. You remember I have that heart condition, right? The one we found out about after I collapsed at your birthday party? Another lie. Uncle Steve did have a heart condition, but he found out about it during a routine physical, not at any birthday party. This person had pieces of truth mixed with complete fabrications, like they'd been studying our family from a distance, collecting fragments of our lives. I texted my mom. Someone at door saying they're Uncle Steve, but it's not him. What do I do? The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared several times, but no message came through. The pounding stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was somehow worse. I crept to the living room window and carefully pulled back the curtain just enough to see the porch. The figure was walking around the side of the house now, heading toward the backyard. Our back door was glass. Those French doors my mom loved because they let in so much light, but they had this flimsy lock that my dad kept saying he'd reinforce but never did. I ran to the kitchen, my socks sliding on the tile, and saw him standing there on the deck, his face pressed against the glass. In the clearer light, I could see him properly for the first time. He had Uncle Steve's general build, that same stocky frame, but his face was all wrong. The features were similar but stretched somehow, like someone had tried to reconstruct Uncle Steve from memory. His eyes were the worst part. They were the right color, that greenish hazel, but they were flat and unblinking, studying me like I was an insect under glass. He smiled when he saw me looking, and his teeth were perfectly white. Too perfect, like dentures or veneers. Nothing like Uncle Steve's coffee-stained, slightly crooked smile. "There you are," he said, his voice still maintaining that Uncle Steve impression, but slipping at the edges like an actor forgetting his accent. His breath fogged up the glass as he spoke, and I noticed he was wearing latex gloves, thin medical ones that made his already strange hands look even more unnatural. "Why don't you just let me in? I promise I won't stay long. I just need to pick up something I left here last week. That watch your dad borrowed, remember?" My dad had never borrowed Uncle Steve's watch. My dad didn't even wear watches. He always said they made his wrist itch. The man's hand moved to the door handle, jiggling it gently at first, then with more force. The lock held, but the whole frame shook, and I knew it wouldn't take much more to break it. I grabbed the biggest knife from the wooden block on the counter, the one Mom used for carving turkey, and held it with both hands, trying to stop them from trembling. "That's not very nice," he said, noticing the knife. His voice dropped the Uncle Steve impression entirely now, becoming something lower, rougher. "I just want to come in and talk." I heard something then that made every muscle in my body lock up, the sound of breaking glass from upstairs. Not loud, not a window smashing, but the careful, deliberate sound of someone cutting through glass, like when my dad had to replace a broken pane in the bathroom window last summer. The man at the back door must have seen my eyes dart upward because he laughed, this soft, pleased chuckle that sounded nothing like Uncle Steve. "That would be my friend," he said conversationally, like we were discussing the weather. "See, I knew you'd be difficult. Kids always are. Your parents really should have taught you better manners. I could hear footsteps above me now, slow and deliberate, moving from what sounded like my parents' bedroom toward the stairs. The man at the door had stopped trying to force it. He just stood there, watching me with those empty eyes, waiting. That's when I realized he wasn't trying to break in anymore. He was keeping me there, making sure I didn't run while his partner came down to get me. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, and I had maybe seconds to decide what to do. The knife felt useless in my hands. What was I going to do? Fight off two grown men? I thought about the panic button on our alarm system, the one my parents had installed after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood last year. It was on the wall near the garage door, just 15 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. The man at the back door tapped on the glass with one gloved finger, a steady rhythm like a countdown. "You should probably put that knife down before someone gets hurt," he said, and his voice had this horrible fake concern in it. "Wouldn't want you to have an accident." The footsteps were coming down the stairs now, heavy and unhurried. I could see a shadow moving in the hallway, getting larger. That's when something inside me just snapped into focus. I wasn't going to stand there and wait for whatever they had planned. I spun around and sprinted for the garage door, slamming my palm on the panic button so hard it hurt. The alarm exploded through the house, this piercing shriek that made my ears ring. The man at the back door started pounding on the glass with both fists, his face contorted with rage, no longer bothering with any pretense. I heard the glass crack, spiderwebbing from the impact. The footsteps on the stairs turned into running, and I saw him clearly as he rounded the corner into the kitchen. A tall, thin man in dark clothes with a ski mask pulled up just enough that I could see his mouth, which was moving like he was cursing, but I couldn't hear anything over the alarm. I yanked open the garage door and ran, still clutching the knife, my socks slipping on the smooth concrete. Our neighbor, Mrs. Nowak, was already on her front lawn with her phone out, probably calling 911. She was this tough Polish lady in her 70s who didn't take nonsense from anyone, and when she saw me running out of the garage barefoot and carrying a knife, she didn't ask questions. She just grabbed my arm and pulled me behind her, shouting something I couldn't understand over the alarm. I turned back to see both men standing in my garage just watching us. They didn't chase me. They just stood there for maybe 3 seconds, looking at Mrs. Nowak and her phone, then turned and walked calmly back through my house. The police arrived within 4 minutes. Turned out 3 different neighbors had called 911 when the alarm went off. They found the house empty, but the back door glass was cracked, and there was a perfect circular hole cut in my parents' bathroom window, the edges smooth like it had been done with professional tools. Nothing was taken, which somehow made it worse. The detective who interviewed me, a woman named Ferretti with kind eyes and gray streaks in her black hair, told me I'd done everything right. She said the men had probably been watching our house, knew my parents' car was gone, knew about Uncle Steve being away, maybe from social media, maybe from just observing. They'd gathered enough information to make their story believable, counting on a teenager being too polite or confused to question someone claiming to be family. What really got to me was when she said they'd probably done this before, successfully, to other kids who hadn't noticed the little mistakes, who'd opened the door thinking they were helping a relative. The part that still keeps me up at night, even now, 6 years later, is what they found in our garbage can by the curb. There was a manila folder with printouts, Facebook photos of our family, including recent ones from my mom's page showing Uncle Steve at Easter dinner, notes about our schedules written in neat handwriting, and a list of family members with details about their relationships to us. But the worst thing was a photo of me walking home from school, taken with a long lens from across the street, dated 2 weeks before that Saturday. They'd been planning it for a while, studying us, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The police never caught them. The fingerprints on the folder didn't match anyone in the system, and the partial license plate Mrs. Nowak remembered led nowhere. My parents installed a whole new security system, cameras everywhere, reinforced doors, the works. But I never felt safe there again. We moved to Virginia the next year, and I still check every lock twice before bed. Still pause when someone knocks instead of using the doorbell. and I absolutely never ever open the door without seeing exactly who's there, no matter how familiar their voice sounds. The wallpaper in my apartment was peeling off in long strips, yellowed from decades of cigarette smoke from previous tenants. And every morning I'd wake up to find another piece had fallen during the night. It was February 2022, and I'd been living in that rundown building on the outskirts of Detroit for about 3 months, working nights at a warehouse while trying to save enough money to move somewhere decent. The place was a dump, but at $400 a month it was all I could afford after my divorce left me starting over at 34. Most nights I'd come home around 2 a.m., heat up whatever leftovers I had in the microwave that only worked if you held the door shut with your hand, and pass out on my second-hand couch while some true crime podcast played in the background. The building had 12 units, and mine was on the 3rd floor, right next to apartment 3B where the Carmichaels lived. At least that's what their mail said when it accidentally got delivered to my box. The Carmichaels moved in about a month after I did, and from day one, I knew they were going to be trouble. The husband, a stocky guy with a neck tattoo of a scorpion that seemed to pulse when he got angry, worked construction and came home most days covered in drywall dust and rage. His wife, a thin woman with bleached hair that had turned a weird orange color at the roots, worked at a gas station and always wore these oversized sunglasses, even at night, even in the hallway. Their fight started small, raised voices that I could hear through the paper-thin walls while I tried to sleep before my shift. But within 2 weeks, it escalated to screaming matches that shook the light fixture in my bedroom, the sound of furniture being thrown, glass breaking, her crying and begging him to stop. I'd lie there with my pillow over my head, counting down the minutes until I had to leave for work, telling myself it wasn't my business, that getting involved would only make my life harder. Everything changed on a Monday night in early March when I heard something different through the wall. Not just yelling or crying, but this wet, meaty sound, like someone tenderizing steak with a hammer, followed by complete silence. The silence was worse than the screaming because at least when she was crying, I knew she was still conscious. I sat up in bed, still in my work uniform because I'd just gotten home 20 minutes earlier, and pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. Then footsteps, heavy ones pacing back and forth. I could hear him muttering something but couldn't make out the words. About 10 minutes later, I heard their door open and close, then his boots stomping down the hallway toward the stairs. Through my peephole, I watched him leave carrying a rolled-up rug over his shoulder, the end of it dark with what looked like a stain. My mouth went dry as I realized she hadn't made a sound since that horrible thudding noise. I paced my apartment for an hour, going back and forth between my kitchen and living room, which were basically the same room separated by a counter with missing cabinet doors. Part of me wanted to knock on their door, check if she was okay, but I kept remembering the way he'd looked at me the one time we'd crossed paths in the hallway. His eyes were these pale gray things, like dirty ice, and they'd tracked me like a predator sizing up prey. Finally, around 4 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, went into my bathroom, the farthest room from their apartment, turned on the shower to mask my voice, and called 911. I told them I'd heard what sounded like domestic violence, that it had gone quiet suddenly, that I was worried someone might be seriously hurt. The dispatcher said they'd send someone to check it out, took my name and apartment number, told me to stay in my unit and wait for the officers to contact me if they needed a statement. The cops showed up about 30 minutes later, and through my peephole I watched 2 officers knock on the Carmichael's door. She answered, alive, thank God, wearing a turtleneck in March and keeping her face turned away from the hallway light. Even from my limited view, I could see her hands trembling as she held the door open just a crack. The officers talked to her for maybe 5 minutes, their voices low and professional, but she kept shaking her head, saying everything was fine, that her husband was at work, that she'd just dropped some dishes and that must have been what I heard. They asked if they could come in and look around, but she said no, that she had to get ready for her shift, and since they didn't have a warrant and she wasn't inviting them in, they left. One of them knocked on my door afterward, and I gave a statement about what I'd heard, but without her cooperation, they said there wasn't much they could do. The officer, a young guy with a mustache that looked like he'd drawn it on with a pencil, handed me his card and told me to call again if I heard anything else concerning. I tried to go to sleep after that, but I kept thinking about the way she'd stood in that doorway, angled so we couldn't see the left side of her face, the way her voice had sounded hollow when she'd insisted everything was fine. Around noon, I woke up to the sound of their door slamming so hard that one of my picture frames fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. Through the wall, I could hear him screaming, calling her a stupid bitch, asking her if she thought she was clever, if she thought he wouldn't find out. Then I heard my name. He was yelling my full name, which he must have gotten from the cops or maybe from our mailboxes downstairs, saying I needed to mind my own fucking business if I knew what was good for me. The walls in that place were so thin that I could hear him punching something. The wall, maybe, or a door. And with each impact, I could feel the vibration through my floor. This went on for 20 minutes before everything went quiet again. But it was that dangerous kind of quiet, like the air before a tornado. I had to leave for work at 5 p.m., and I'll be honest, I was terrified to step out of my apartment. I stood at my door for 5 minutes with my hand on the deadbolt, listening for any sound from the hallway. When I finally got the courage to leave, I practically ran to the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time. But nothing happened. Their door stayed closed, the hallway stayed empty, and I made it to my car, a beat-up Ford Focus with a driver's side door that you had to lift while closing, without incident. All through my shift that night, I kept checking my phone, half expecting to see a text from my landlord saying my apartment had been broken into or burned down. But there was nothing. When I got home at 2:30 a.m., the building was dead quiet. I could see light coming from under the Carmichael's door, and I could hear a TV playing, but that was it. I went into my apartment, locked the deadbolt, put a chair against the door for good measure, and tried to convince myself that maybe he just needed to blow off steam, that it was over now. That's when I heard the pounding on my door. Not knocking, pounding, like someone hitting it with the side of their fist. 3 heavy blows that made the chair I'd propped against it jump. Stood there in my living room, still in my work clothes, not moving, not breathing, hoping whoever it was would think I wasn't home. The pounding came again, harder this time, and I heard the wood around my deadbolt crack slightly. Then silence. I crept toward the door, trying not to make the floorboards creak, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the light bulb that usually illuminated the area right outside my door had been unscrewed just enough to leave my doorway in shadow. I stood there with my eye pressed to the peephole for probably 10 minutes, waiting for movement, for any sign of who had been there. That's when I noticed it. A white envelope on the floor that had been slid under my door while I was looking through the peephole. I didn't want to pick it up. Every instinct told me to leave it there, to pretend I hadn't seen it, maybe even to call the cops again. But curiosity won out, the way it always does when you know you shouldn't do something. I bent down, grabbed the envelope by its corner like it might explode, and brought it into the kitchen where the light was better. My name was written on the front in block letters with a black Sharpie, the kind of deliberately anonymous writing that made my chest tight with dread. Inside was a single brass key, looked like a house key, well worn with scratches along the teeth, and a folded piece of notebook paper. The paper had those frayed edges where someone had ripped it out in a hurry. When I unfolded it, there were just 11 words written in the same block letters. "We can come in any time. Next time you won't hear us." My legs actually gave out and I had to sit down on my kitchen floor, right there next to the garbage can that smelled like old Chinese takeout. The key was identical to my apartment key. Not similar, identical. Same brand, same wear pattern on the head where years of use had rubbed away the brass plating. I compared them side by side under the kitchen light, and they were perfect matches, down to a tiny nick on the third tooth that I'd noticed when I first moved in. Someone had made a copy of my key. The only people who should have had access to it were me and my landlord, Mr. Garrison, a 70-year-old man who lived in Florida and only communicated through his property management company. But then I remembered, about 2 weeks earlier, I'd lost my keys at work. They'd fallen out of my jacket pocket somewhere in the warehouse, and I'd spent my entire lunch break looking for them. Eventually found them by the loading dock, figured they'd slipped out when I was moving boxes. Except now I wondered if they'd really been lost, or if someone had taken them, made a copy, and returned them where I'd find them. The thought made me want to vomit. I called in sick to work the next day, something I'd never done before, and spent the morning at Home Depot buying new locks, a door security bar, and one of those doorstop alarms that screams if someone tries to force entry. The guy at the store, a kid with gauged ears and a name tag that said Nathan, helped me pick out a deadbolt that he said would be practically impossible to pick without power tools. I wanted to tell him that picking the lock wasn't my concern anymore, that they had a key, but I just nodded and threw it in my cart along with a motion sensor light for inside my apartment. When I got back to the building around 1 p.m., the Carmichael's door was open, and I could see straight through to their living room. She was sitting on a brown couch with stuffing coming out of the arms, sorting through what looked like mail, while he stood by the window smoking a cigarette even though it was against the lease. We made eye contact for maybe 2 seconds, him, not her, and he gave me this slow nod, like we were acknowledging something between us. His mouth moved like he was about to say something, but then he just took another drag and turned back to the window. I hurried into my apartment and spent the next 3 hours replacing the locks, my drill so loud I'm sure the whole floor could hear it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, the security bar wedged under the doorknob, the doorstop alarm activated, and a baseball bat across my lap. A Louisville Slugger I'd bought years ago for a company softball team I never actually joined. Around 3 a.m. I heard footsteps in the hallway, that distinctive heavy boot sound I'd learned to recognize. They stopped right outside my door, no knocking, no pounding, just standing there. I could see the shadow of feet in the gap under the door, perfectly still. This went on for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours, before the footsteps moved away. The next morning I packed everything I could fit in my car, left the furniture because it was all garbage anyway, and drove to my sister's place in Ohio. Didn't even tell the landlord I was leaving, just abandoned the place and figured losing my security deposit was worth it. Before I left, I slid the key they'd given me under their door with my own note that just said keep it. Never went back, never found out what happened to them, and honestly, I don't want to know. Sometimes at night, even now, 2 years later, living in a decent apartment with proper locks and normal neighbors, I still wake up thinking I hear those boots in the hallway. Living alone for the first time hits different when you're 20, and convinced nothing bad can happen to you. I just moved into this cramped studio apartment near campus in early May 2023, one of those old brick buildings from the 50s with radiators that clanged all night, and windows painted shut from decades of careless landlords. The place wasn't much, just 400 square feet with a kitchenette that barely fit a microwave and a bathroom where you could touch both walls at once, but it was mine. That Saturday afternoon I was sitting cross-legged on my second-hand futon, laptop balanced on my knees trying to finish a paper on Victorian literature that was due Monday morning. The building was eerily quiet, which wasn't unusual for weekends when most students went home or partied elsewhere. I actually preferred it that way. The silence helped me focus, and I'd made myself a huge mug of that vanilla chai tea my roommate from freshman year had gotten me hooked on. The knock came around 3:30, 3 solid raps that made me jump and nearly spilled tea all over my keyboard. I wasn't expecting anyone. My friend Claudia was at her parents' place in Pennsylvania for the weekend, and the guy I'd been seeing, Thomas, was working his shift at the campus bookstore until 6. Through the peephole I saw a man I didn't recognize, probably mid-40s, wearing a navy jumpsuit with what looked like a name patch sewn on the chest. He had this weird posture, standing too close to the door with his shoulder almost pressed against it, like he was trying to hear if anyone was inside. His hair was this unnatural shade of reddish brown, the kind you get from a box dye job gone wrong, slicked back with too much gel that made it look wet even though it was a sunny day. When he knocked again, harder this time, I could see his knuckles were covered in these dark, irregular scabs, like he'd been punching something rough repeatedly. "Maintenance," he called out, his voice muffled but oddly high-pitched for such a stocky guy. "Got a report about a leak coming from your unit. Need to check your kitchen pipes right away." Here's the thing. I'd been living there for 3 weeks already, and the actual maintenance guy, Jorge, was this sweet older gentleman who always wore a gray uniform with the building's logo embroidered on the pocket. Jorge had fixed my toilet the first week I moved in, and he'd specifically told me that maintenance never shows up without calling first, or leaving a notice under the door at least 24 hours in advance. Plus, he'd mentioned he was the only maintenance person for our building, and the 2 adjacent ones, and that he never worked weekends unless it was an absolute emergency, like a burst pipe flooding multiple units. This guy at my door? His jumpsuit had no logo, just that name patch I couldn't quite read through the peephole's fisheye distortion. I called out, keeping the chain lock secured. "I haven't reported any leak, and I haven't gotten any notice about maintenance today." The man shifted his weight, and I heard him breathing heavily, almost panting, like he'd run up the 3 flights of stairs to my floor. "Ma'am, the leak's affecting the apartment below you," he insisted, and now his voice had this strange urgency that made the hair on my arms stand up. "The tenant in 2B called it in an hour ago. Water's dripping through their ceiling tiles. Could cause major damage if we don't fix it now." The thing is, I knew for a fact that 2B had been empty for at least a month. I'd seen the previous tenant, an elderly woman with 3 cats, move out in April, and the super had mentioned they were renovating it before listing it again. The man started rattling the doorknob, not violently but persistently, like he was testing how sturdy the lock was. Then he did something that made every instinct in my body scream danger. He dropped to his knees, and through the gap under my door, about 1.5 inches because the building had settled unevenly over the years, I could see his face pressing against the floor, trying to look inside. His eye appeared in that gap, bloodshot and wide, darting back and forth like he was mapping out my apartment. I stepped back reflexively, my bare feet silent on the worn hardwood, and grabbed my phone from the futon. "I'm calling the building manager right now to verify," I announced loudly, hoping he'd give up and leave. Instead, I heard him stand up quickly, his knees popping, and then came this low, guttural laugh that didn't match the high-pitched voice he'd been using before. "No need for that, ma'am, just trying to help," he said, but he didn't move away from the door. I could hear him breathing, these wet, ragged breaths, and then the sound of metal scraping against metal. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat as I dialed 911, but I kept my voice steady and loud enough for him to hear. "Hi, yes, I need police at 4427 Elmwood Avenue. There's a man impersonating maintenance trying to break into my apartment." The scraping stopped immediately. Through the peephole, I watched him step back from the door, his face flushed and sweaty, those scabbed hands clenched into fists. He stared directly at the peephole like he knew I was watching, and his mouth stretched into this unnaturally wide grin that showed too many teeth, some of them brown and rotting at the gums. The 911 operator was asking me questions, but I couldn't look away from that grin. The man reached into his jumpsuit pocket, and for a terrifying second I thought he was going to pull out a weapon. Instead, he produced a folded piece of paper and held it up to the peephole. Written in shaky block letters with what looked like black marker were the words, "I know you're alone." Then he tucked the paper back in his pocket, gave a mock salute with 2 fingers, and walked away down the hallway. But he didn't head toward the stairs or the elevator. I heard him stop at what sounded like the apartment 2 doors down, 3F, where a grad student named Lily lived by herself. The same 3 knocks echoed through the hallway, the same high-pitched voice. "Maintenance, got a report about a leak." My whole body went cold as I heard Lily's door chain rattle, heard her young voice say, "Oh, sure, just give me a second to put something on." I screamed through my door, "Lily, don't open it! He's not maintenance! I've called the police!" There was a pause, Then I heard Lily's door slam shut and the deadbolt turn. The man in the hallway let out this frustrated growl, definitely in his real voice now. Deep and gravelly, nothing like the maintenance worker act he'd been putting on. He pounded on Lily's door 3 times with what sounded like the side of his fist, making the whole hallway echo. Then I heard his heavy footsteps moving back toward my apartment. He stopped right outside my door again, and I could hear him muttering something under his breath. These incomprehensible words that sounded like he was having an argument with himself. The 911 operator was telling me units were on the way, maybe 5 minutes out, but 5 minutes feels like 5 hours when there's just a piece of wood between you and someone who clearly isn't right in the head. Then I heard another sound that made my knees weak, keys jingling. Not just a few keys, but what sounded like dozens of them, metal clinking against metal as he sorted through them. The scraping started again at my lock, and this time I recognized the sound. He was trying different keys, one after another, methodically working through what must have been a massive ring of them. I grabbed the biggest knife I had from my kitchen drawer, this old butcher knife my mom had given me when I moved out, and positioned myself behind the door. The operator kept telling me to stay calm, that officers were 3 minutes away now, but I could hear the lock mechanism clicking and turning as he found keys that partially fit. Through the peephole, I could see him crouched down, his face level with the doorknob, tongue poking out between his lips in concentration like a kid working on a difficult puzzle. His free hand was pressed flat against my door, and I noticed his fingernails were way too long, curved and yellowed, with dirt or something darker caked underneath them. Suddenly, Lily's voice rang out from her apartment. "I've got my gun and I know how to use it. The cops are coming." That was pure bluff. Lily was a sociology PhD student from California who did yoga every morning and wouldn't hurt a fly, but the man didn't know that. He stood up abruptly, shoving the keys back in his pocket, and for a moment just stood there, swaying slightly like he was drunk or dizzy. Then he did something I'll never forget. He leaned close to my door and whispered, but loud enough for me to hear clearly, "I've been watching you for weeks, through your window when you change. I know you put your lamp on the left side of your bed. I know you sing in the shower every morning at 7:15. That birthmark on your shoulder blade, shaped like a butterfly." My legs nearly gave out because everything he said was true. My apartment faced the back alley, 3rd floor, and I'd never thought anyone could see in. But there was a taller building across the way, mostly offices that I assumed were empty on weekends and evenings. The birthmark thing hit me the hardest. You couldn't see that unless I was wearing a tank top or less, which meant he'd been watching me in my most private moments. The operator was saying something, but I couldn't focus. Blood rushing in my ears so loud it drowned everything out. The man continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Your boyfriend doesn't stay over on weeknights. Your friend with the curly hair hasn't visited in 9 days. The package you got yesterday is still sitting by your door unopened. Amazon, right?" The blue tape gave it away. Before I could process any of this, the stairwell door slammed open, and I heard police radios crackling, heavy boots running down the hallway. The man outside my door didn't run immediately, though. He stood perfectly still for maybe 3 seconds, then bent down one more time to the gap under my door. This time, he slid something underneath. A Polaroid photograph. Then he sprinted toward the opposite end of the hallway, where the other stairwell was, his footsteps echoing like gunshots. I heard the officers shouting, heard them pursuing him, their radios going crazy with updates and coordinates. I didn't move to pick up the photo right away, just stood there gripping the knife, waiting until an officer knocked and identified himself, showing his badge through the peephole. When I finally opened the door, my legs were shaking so bad, I had to lean against the wall. The officer, a young guy who looked like he could have been in one of my classes, asked if I was hurt, but I just pointed at the Polaroid on the floor. We both looked down at it, and I felt bile rise in my throat. The photo showed me sleeping in my bed, taken from inside my apartment. The angle was from the foot of my bed, like someone had been standing right there in my room while I slept. The timestamp on the bottom corner was from 2 nights ago, when Thomas had been at his night shift, and I'd gone to bed early with a headache. In the photo, my blanket was pulled down to my waist, and someone had drawn little red hearts around my face with what looked like lipstick or marker. The officer immediately called for backup to search my apartment, and within minutes, they found how he'd been getting in. The maintenance closet in the hallway had an access panel that connected to the ventilation system, and one of the grates in my bedroom ceiling had been carefully unscrewed and replaced multiple times, judging by the scratches on the screws. They found more Polaroids in that maintenance closet, dozens of them, not just of me, but of Lily, of the girl who lived in 3C, even some of Mrs. Chen from the first floor. Pictures of us doing normal things, cooking, watching TV, studying, sleeping. All taken from inside our apartments. The closet also had a makeshift bed, empty food containers, and a notebook filled with our schedules, habits, and personal details written in that same shaky handwriting from the note he'd shown me. They caught him 3 blocks away, trying to jimmy open a window to another apartment building. Turned out his name was Gordon Briggs, a former maintenance worker who'd been fired from a building management company 8 months earlier for inappropriate behavior toward female tenants. He'd kept copies of master keys from dozens of buildings he'd worked in over the years, and had been living in maintenance rooms and vacant apartments across the city, watching women through vents and gaps in the infrastructure that nobody ever thinks about. The police found his main stash in an abandoned unit in a building 6 blocks from mine. Hundreds more photos, pieces of mail he'd stolen, even some clothing items. I had to identify a sweater I thought I'd lost at the laundromat. The detective told me Gordon had been escalating, that the fake maintenance visits were new behavior, more aggressive than his previous stalking. I moved out that same week, stayed with Thomas until I found a new place with better security and no maintenance closets near the units. Lily moved too, and so did the girl from 3C. The building management company paid for our moving expenses and tried to keep it quiet, but word got out anyway. Last I heard, the building was half empty and up for sale. I still check my ceiling vents in every new place I live, still feel my chest tighten when someone knocks on my door unexpectedly, and I never, ever open the door for maintenance without calling the building manager first to verify. Last winter was when everything started getting weird at my duplex in Albany. I was 23, fresh out of college, working nights at a warehouse just to make rent on this cramped place I'd found through Craigslist. The building was old, probably from the 1940s, with those thin walls where you could hear everything. Footsteps, conversations, even someone brushing their teeth next door. My neighbor, Walter, was this quiet guy in his 50s who worked some kind of office job downtown. We'd exchange maybe 3 words a month in the shared laundry room downstairs, usually just him asking if the dryer was free, while adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses that always seemed to have fingerprint smudges on them. The first time I noticed my door unlocked, I figured I'd just been exhausted from my shift and forgotten to turn the deadbolt properly. You know how your brain plays tricks when you're running on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. But then it happened again 3 days later. Came home around 7 in the morning after a particularly brutal night unloading trucks, and the door pushed open without me even using my key. Nothing was missing. Nothing moved. Just that sick feeling in my gut that someone had been in my space. Started taking pictures of how I left things. The angle of my coffee mug on the counter, the way my shoes lined up by the door, even the position of my TV remote on the couch arm. For about 2 weeks, nothing else happened. I'd almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the lock was just worn out. Maybe the door frame had warped from the cold. Then came that Thursday night. I'd called in sick to work because I'd been throwing up all day, probably from some sketchy Chinese takeout I'd grabbed the night before. Around 9:30, I was lying on my couch watching some mindless reality show when I heard it. The distinct sound of my refrigerator door opening. Not the hum of it running, but that specific suction sound when the seal breaks. I muted the TV immediately, and there it was again. The clink of glass bottles shifting in the door shelf. Walter was in my kitchen. I could see his silhouette from where I was lying, illuminated by the fridge light. He was wearing what looked like pajama pants and a faded blue t-shirt with some kind of company logo on it. The strangest part was how casual he seemed, like he belonged there, carefully moving things around to reach something in the back. I sat up slowly, and he must have sensed the movement because he turned around, still holding my jar of strawberry jam. "Oh, hey there," he said, his voice steady and pleasant, like we'd bumped into each other at the grocery store. "Didn't think you'd be home tonight. Found your spare key in the laundry room last week. Figured we're neighbors, shouldn't be a big deal if I grabbed some sugar for my coffee." The thing is, I'd never had a spare key. Never made one, never hid one anywhere. My landlord had one copy, and that was it. But Walter was standing there, holding my jam, waiting for an answer with this expression that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't neutral either. Like his face was stuck between two emotions. I told him there was no spare key, that he needed to leave right now. He set the jam down on my counter, really gently, and pulled out a brass key from his pocket. "This one," he said, holding it up to the light. "Found it magnetized under the washing machine. Has your apartment number scratched right into it, see?" He stepped closer to show me, and I could smell his breath. Coffee and something medicinal, like cough syrup. I backed up toward my phone on the coffee table. Told him again to get out or I'd call the cops. Walter didn't move, though. He just stood there in my kitchen doorway, tapping that key against his palm in this slow rhythm. "You work nights at the distribution center on Route 41, right? Must be exhausting. All alone here during the day, nobody checking on you." His voice stayed conversational, but the words made my skin prickle. "I've been meaning to return this key, honestly. Just kept forgetting. But since I'm here, mind if I get that sugar? I already started making my coffee next door and it's getting cold." The way he said it, like we were having a normal conversation about borrowing ingredients, while standing in my apartment at night, it was like talking to someone whose reality operated on different rules. I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911, but Walter just sighed like I was being unreasonable. "There's no need for that," he said, finally moving toward my front door. "I'll get my sugar another time, but you should really be more careful about where you leave your keys. Found this one so easily. Imagine if someone dangerous had picked it up instead." He opened my door using that brass key from the outside lock, proving it actually worked. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at me. "You should try sleeping during normal hours sometime. All that night work, irregular schedule, it's not healthy. I can hear you moving around at odd times through the walls, pacing, talking to yourself. The walls are thin, remember?" Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. I called my landlord immediately, even though it was late. He sounded annoyed but confirmed he'd only ever made one spare key, which he still had in his office safe. When I insisted someone had copied my key, he said it was impossible. The locks were some special brand that required authorization from the manufacturer to duplicate. I changed the lock myself that night, went to the 24-hour hardware store and bought the most expensive deadbolt they had. Installed it right there at 2 in the morning, with YouTube tutorials playing on my phone. The old lock looked normal when I removed it. No scratches or signs of tampering. But I threw it in the dumpster outside anyway, along with that brass key Walter had left on my kitchen counter. 3 days passed without incident. I'd started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed and installed one of those doorstop alarms from Amazon. Then Monday came. I got home from my shift around 6:40 in the morning, exhausted from loading boxes all night. The new lock was still engaged. The doorstop alarm hadn't been triggered. Everything seemed fine. I made myself some instant oatmeal and crashed hard, not even bothering to shower. Woke up around 3 in the afternoon to the sound of my shower running. Not dripping, fully running like someone was in there. I grabbed the bat and crept toward the bathroom. The door was slightly open, steam seeping out into the hallway. Through the gap, I could see a figure behind my shower curtain, just standing there under the water, not moving at all. I kicked the door open and yanked the curtain back. It was Walter, fully clothed in khakis and a button-down shirt, just standing under the hot water with his eyes closed. When he opened them, he didn't even look surprised. "The water pressure is better in your unit," he said matter-of-factly, water streaming down his face. "Mine barely gets warm anymore." "Landlord won't fix it." He stepped out of the shower, his clothes making wet squelching sounds against the tile. "How did you get in here?" I demanded, still gripping the bat. He reached into his soaked pocket and pulled out another key, this one silver and newer looking. "You really should check your ceiling tiles," he said. "The one above your bathroom? It's loose. Connects right to my bathroom through the crawl space. Been meaning to tell the landlord about that too." That's when I lost it. Started yelling at him to get out, waving the bat around. Walter just walked past me, dripping water all over my floor, and sat down on my couch like nothing was wrong. The wet fabric made this horrible squishing sound as he settled in. "You need to calm down," he said, wringing out his shirt sleeve onto my carpet. "We're neighbors. Neighbors help each other. I water your plant when you're at work, that spider plant by the window. You never water it enough. I make sure your mail doesn't pile up. I even killed those mice in your walls last month. You didn't even know you had mice, did you?" He was right. I hadn't known about any mice. But now I was thinking about all those times I'd come home to find things slightly different. My plant looking healthier, mail stacked differently, that faint smell of men's cologne I'd attributed to imagination. I told him I was calling the police right now, no more warnings. Finally, something shifted in his expression. He stood up from my soaked couch and walked to the door, leaving wet footprints across my floor. "Fine," he said, his voice different now, colder, flatter. "But when your pipes freeze this winter, when your power goes out during storms, when you need someone to check if you're still breathing after not coming home for days, don't expect help. I know you don't have family here. I know you don't have friends. I was just trying to look out for you." He left through the front door this time, using yet another key I didn't know existed. I called the police, filed a report, but they said without proof of forced entry or stolen items, it was a civil matter. The landlord finally agreed to change the locks after I threatened to break my lease, but Walter had already moved out by then, disappeared overnight, leaving his apartment completely empty. I moved out 2 weeks later, stayed with a co-worker until I found a new place across town, a studio apartment on the 3rd floor with security cameras in the hallways and a doorman who worked nights. Never found out how Walter made those keys or why he'd chosen me to fixate on. The landlord swore he'd never given Walter access to anything, and the key manufacturer said their records showed no duplicates were ever ordered. Sometimes I wonder if he's doing the same thing to someone else now, standing in their shower, sitting on their couch, living these parallel, invasive moments in strangers' homes. I triple-check my locks every night, installed cameras inside my apartment, and I never, ever talk to my neighbors anymore. The other day I found a spider plant at my door with no note. I threw it straight in the garbage and spent the next 3 hours checking every corner of my apartment, every ceiling tile, every possible space where someone could hide a key. I'd been living in that small rental house for about 8 months, just me and my 6-year-old son, Caleb. It sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a suburb where nothing much happened. At least that's what I told myself when I signed the lease. My routine was predictable. Work, pick up Caleb from after-school care, dinner, homework, then bedtime around 8. That night, everything felt calm. The air was still. The street was quiet. And from my kitchen window I could see the faint glow of other houses settling into their own nightly routines. I had just finished reading Caleb his usual 2 bedtime stories when I heard the click from the backyard motion light. That sharp electrical pop the fixture makes when it flicks on was distinct enough that I paused mid-sentence. I brushed it off at first, probably a raccoon nosing around the trash bin, I thought, and went back to tucking the blanket around him. But the yard was fenced, and the bin was latched. Still, I didn't want him picking up on my hesitation, so I gave him a goodnight kiss and stepped quietly into the hallway. From the living room, I peeked through the blinds just enough to see the backyard. The bright cone of light illuminated the patchy grass and the worn wooden fence, casting sharp shadows from the lawn chairs I'd never gotten around to using. Nothing moved. The air was perfectly still. No wind to sway the tree branches, no flutter of leaves. I waited, holding my breath without realizing it, until the light clicked off again. Probably a bug, I told myself, though the thought didn't quite stick. I went back to the kitchen to clean up, but before I'd finished rinsing the plates, the motion light clicked on again. This time I moved faster, padding to the window with the blinds barely parted. The yard looked exactly the same as before. Still, silent, empty. It was just strange enough that a thin unease started creeping up the back of my neck. I told myself I'd ignore it unless it happened again. But less than 5 minutes later, the click came a third time, and when I looked out, someone was standing just beyond the reach of the light, unmoving, facing directly toward my house. The figure stood just past the bright edge like it knew exactly where the sensor stopped seeing. The fence boards came up to his shoulders, 5.5 feet to the top rail, so he was taller than me, maybe 6 foot or close. A hood covered most of the head, and what I could make out of the face was a flat darkness where features should have caught the light. No shifting weight, no fidgeting, not even the small movements people do without noticing. I killed the kitchen light to lose the glare on the glass and pressed my forehead to the cool pane, counting the seconds until the motion light timed out like it always did after a minute. The light blinked off. Darkness pressed in, thick and complete for 2 heartbeats. Then the click came again and the yard exploded white. Lawn chairs, hose reel, the crooked bird feeder my kid painted. You could read the brush strokes in that paint. The figure hadn't moved an inch. My back found the wall without me planning it, and I slid along the cabinets checking locks in muscle memory. Deadbolt on the back door, stick in the slider track, window latches down. A text went to my neighbor across the cul-de-sac. Aaron, are you awake? Someone's in my yard. 3 little dots bubbled, then disappeared. No reply. Caleb's voice floated down the hall, small and sleepy. He wanted water. Every instinct screamed at me to keep him in bed, but ignoring him would only make him come looking. I grabbed his cup, filled it at the sink without taking my eyes off the blinds, and met him at his bedroom door. "Buddy, stay in bed, I'm handling a grown-up thing," I whispered, keeping my voice steady. As I tucked the blanket again, a soft scrape, grit grinding under a shoe, carried from the side yard where the gravel path runs to the gate. The light cycled off, then on again. And when I returned to the window, the figure stood a single step closer to the house. Talking to the glass felt ridiculous, but silence felt worse. "You need to leave," I said, keeping my voice low and controlled. No response. The key fob for my car sat in the dish by the door. I hit the panic button. The horn erupted, headlights flashed. The whole quiet street echoed. The figure backed into the darkness, not hurried, just deliberate, and vanished beyond the sensor's reach. That was my line. I dialed 911 and gave the dispatcher, her name was Kara, my address, the layout of my yard, and a running description of what I'd seen. While we spoke, the side gate latch rattled once, a clean metal click like someone testing how much give it had. Kara told me to stay on the line, keep the doors locked, and move away from the windows. I herded Caleb into my bedroom and locked the door, pulling him onto the bed with me while I kept the phone pressed to my ear. The hum of the line and Kara's calm voice were the only things keeping my thoughts from spiraling. Every few seconds I'd catch a faint crunch outside. Gravel, grass, maybe the wooden deck boards flexing under weight. Kara said officers were on the way, maybe 5 minutes out. 5 minutes felt like an hour. I kept scanning the shadows beyond the curtains, half expecting that hooded shape to be inches from the glass when I looked. Then came the sound of the motion light again, that sharp, mechanical click. My bedroom window faced the opposite side of the yard, the part the light barely touched, but in the faint spillover glow I could make out the pale vertical lines of the fence. And there, between 2 slats, a dark shape filled the gap. Someone's face was pressed close enough that I could see the outline of a cheekbone, the curve of a jaw, not moving, just there. I whispered to Kara what I was seeing, and she told me not to engage, that the officers were seconds away now. The next thing I heard was the distant warble of a siren winding into the neighborhood. The figure at the fence disappeared, as if pulled backward by invisible hands. A few seconds later, the motion light went dark for the last time. The cruiser pulled up out front, its headlights sweeping across my living room. 2 officers checked the yard with flashlights, found the gate latch loose but unbroken, and confirmed there were no fresh footprints, at least none they could make out in the patchy grass and hard soil. They took my statement, gave me a case number, and promised extra patrols that week. After they left, I spent the rest of the night in Caleb's room, his small breathing steady against the pillow while I sat by the window watching the backyard. The light never came on again. I replaced it with a camera the next day, one with night vision and a motion alert to my phone. In the months since, it's never once triggered for a person. Still, every time I hear that electric click in the quiet of the night, even if it's just for a wandering cat, I remember that hooded figure standing right where the light stopped, and how they seemed to know exactly how far they could go without being truly seen.